Truck driver finds an elderly woman in a wheelchair in the rain. Then he decides to do this. Michael slammed on the brakes when he spotted the lone figure in the wheelchair in the middle of the highway. The rain was pouring down that Tuesday afternoon, and his truck's windshield wipers could barely keep up with the torrents of water. He blinked several times, wondering if he was seeing things after 12 hours on the road between Pittsburgh and rural New York. But it wasn't. An illusion. An elderly woman was there, alone, completely drenched, her wheelchair parked on the shoulder of the road. Michael checked his rearview mirror but saw no broken-down car, no other vehicle that could explain how she had gotten there. Without a second thought, he turned on his hazard lights and pulled the truck over a few yards ahead. Grabbing the blanket he always kept in the cab, he rushed out, feeling the icy rain soak his blue shirt in seconds. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he shouted over the noise of the rain, approaching her carefully. The woman lifted her face. She must have been in her 70s, her grey hair plastered to her face by the water, but her eyes still shone with an intensity that surprised Michael. She was shivering from the cold, wrapped only in a coat too thin for the weather. I need to get to Greenfield," she said weakly, almost whispering. "My granddaughter." Michael didn't let her finish. He unfolded the blanket and gently draped it over her shoulders, trying to shield her from the relentless rain. "How did you end up here? Where's your family?" The woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if the question pained her. "They brought me here and left me," she murmured, with a sadness that made Michael's heart ache. "They said they couldn't take care of me anymore." The trucker felt anger rising in his chest, but kept his voice calm. "What's your name, ma'am?" "Margaret." "Margaret." "Wilson. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Michael. Let's get you out of this rain right now." He glanced at his truck. The cab had enough space, but getting someone in a wheelchair up there would be nearly impossible. Thinking quickly, he remembered a gas station about 3 miles ahead. "Mrs. Wilson, I'll push your chair to my truck. Can you get into the cab?" She shook her head, pointing to her legs. "I haven't felt anything below my waist in 3 years. After I fell down the stairs," Michael took a deep breath. He couldn't leave her there, but he wasn't sure how to solve this. The rain was getting heavier, and it was starting to get dark. "Here's what we'll do. I'll take you in the truck. There's space behind the seats where I can fit your wheelchair." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us just starting out. Now, back to the story. With great care, Michael lifted Mrs. Wilson in his arms and placed her in the passenger seat. Then he folded the wheelchair and managed to wedge it into the back of the cab. The woman was freezing, trembling uncontrollably even under the blanket. "I'll turn on the heater," he said, starting the truck and adjusting the controls. "You'll warm up in a few minutes." As he pulled back onto the road, Michael couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Who abandons an elderly woman in a wheelchair on the side of a highway in the pouring rain? What kind of family would do that? "Mrs. Wilson, you said you need to get to Greenfield. Is someone expecting you there?" Her answer only confused him more. "I have a granddaughter. She doesn't know I'm coming. In fact, she doesn't even know I exist." Michael nearly hit the brakes again. "What do you mean, ma'am?" "It's a very long and complicated story. My daughter, she distanced herself from the family when she was young. We had a terrible fight, and after that, we never spoke again. I heard she had a daughter, but I never met my granddaughter." The truck driver absorbed the information in silence. The situation was becoming more complex than he had imagined. "And where have you been living until now?" "With my nephew and his wife in Allentown. They took care of me after I had the stroke. But yesterday," her voice faltered. "Yesterday, they said they couldn't anymore, that it was too much expense, too much work, that I should look for my daughter." "But you said your daughter." "My daughter passed away 2 years ago. I found out by chance when a neighbor mentioned it. But my nephew doesn't know that. When I said I wanted to look for my granddaughter, in Greenfield they thought it was a good idea. They drove me here and left me." The story was getting sadder by the minute, and Michael felt the weight of responsibility growing on his shoulders. He couldn't just leave Mrs. Margaret in Greenfield without making sure she had somewhere to stay. Do you know your granddaughter's full name, her address? I know her name is Emily, Emily Wilson, like me. She works at a school downtown. She's a teacher, just like my daughter was. Michael did the math in his head. Greenfield was still 2 hours away, and it was already getting dark. Even if they found this Emily, there was no guarantee she would take in a grandmother she had never met. Mrs. Margaret, I'll be honest with you. It's very risky to show up at someone's house like this unannounced. What if your granddaughter can't take you in today? Do you have money for a boarding house, somewhere to stay the night? The silence that followed was the answer he didn't want to hear. My nephew kept my pension. He said it was to cover the expenses I caused. I only have $20 in my purse. Anger swelled in Michael's chest again. How could people be so cruel to their own family? Listen, Mrs. Margaret, I can't leave you in a situation like this. Here's what we'll do. We'll go to Greenfield. We'll try to find your granddaughter. If it doesn't work out, you'll stay at my place tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure something else out. You'd do that for me? She asked, her eyes glistening. I would. My mother always taught me that you never turn your back on someone who needs help. But as he drove down the wet road, Michael had no idea that this decision would change his life completely, and that Mrs. Margaret's story was far more complicated than she had told him. They arrived in Greenfield when it was already completely dark. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet, reflecting the glow of the streetlights. Michael stopped at a gas station to ask about schools in town. There are 3 schools downtown, the attendant informed him. Lincoln Elementary School, Washington High School, and Holy Grace Academy. Do you know a teacher named Emily Wilson? The young man thought for a moment. Emily Wilson? That name sounds familiar. I think she works at Lincoln. It's on Main Street, number 245. Back in the truck, Michael relayed the information to Mrs. Margaret. He could see she was nervous, her hands fidgeting constantly. What if she doesn't want to see me? The elderly woman murmured. What if she doesn't even know who I am? Let's take it one step at a time, Mrs. Margaret. First, we'll try to talk to her. The school was on a quiet street downtown. It was an old but well-maintained building with green railings and a small garden in front. Michael parked the truck and helped Mrs. Margaret back into her wheelchair. The school's security guard, a man in his 60s, greeted them kindly. Good evening. Can I help you? We're looking for teacher Emily Wilson, said Michael. It's an urgent family matter. Teacher Emily. She left about 2 hours ago, but if it's urgent, I can give you her number. Michael accepted the number, but when he tried calling, it went straight to voicemail. He tried twice more with the same result. Her phone must be dead or out of service, said the doorman. That happens a lot around here. Would you like her address? Margaret nodded anxiously, and the doorman wrote it down on a piece of paper. 127 Flower Street. It's in St. John's neighborhood, about a 10-minute drive from here. The drive to Emily's house was tense. Michael could feel Margaret's nervousness growing with every block. She was clearly regretting her decision to seek out her granddaughter. What if I'm a stranger to her? She murmured. What if my daughter never mentioned me? Margaret, there's no use worrying about the worst before it happens. Let's see how she reacts first. Flower Street was a quiet residential road with small, well-kept houses. Number 127 was a light blue house with a white iron gate. The lights were on in the living room, a sign someone was home. Michael rang the doorbell, and a few seconds later, a young woman in her 30s appeared, her brown hair tied in a ponytail. She was wearing comfortable pajamas and slippers, clearly winding down after a day's work. Good evening. Can I help? You? Emily asked, looking curiously at the truck driver and the elderly woman in the wheelchair. Good evening. Are you Emily Wilson, the teacher? Yes. Are you parents of one of my students? Michael glanced at Margaret, waiting for her to take the lead. But the woman was frozen, staring intently at the younger woman. Actually, no, Michael said, realizing he had to guide the conversation. This is Margaret Wilson. I'm your grandmother, Margaret managed to whisper, her voice breaking. Emily seemed not to understand at first. She looked back and forth between the two visitors, confused. My grandmother? But I don't have any living grandparents. My mother always said that. Your mother's name was Olivia Wilson, Margaret said, finding strength in her voice. She was also a teacher. She loved reading poetry and had a crescent-shaped birthmark on her right arm. Emily turned pale. Michael could see the information had struck deep. How do you know that? Because I'm her mother. And your grandmother. The silence that followed felt endless. Emily gripped the doorframe as if she needed physical support to process the revelation. But my mother said that her family... We had a terrible fight when she was young, Margaret admitted. Stubborn mother and daughter things. We never reconciled and now it's too late. Why is it too late? Emily asked, still confused. Now it was Margaret's turn to fall silent. Michael realized she hadn't yet told her granddaughter about her mother's passing. Is my mother okay? Emily pressed. Where is she? She passed away 2 years ago, Margaret said, tears in her eyes. It was her heart, very sudden. Emily staggered, and Michael instinctively stepped forward, ready to catch her if needed. She's gone? The young woman whispered. 2 years. Ago. I found out by chance. An old neighbor told me. That's when I realized I'd lost my only chance to make things right with her. Emily leaned against the doorframe, clearly in shock. Michael could see her struggling to take it all in. My mother never mentioned any living relatives. She always said she was alone in the world, that she had no family. She was angry with me, Margaret explained, and she had every right to be. I was very harsh with her when she decided to marry your father. I thought he wasn't good enough. We had a terrible fight. I said things I shouldn't have. You fought because of my dad. Because of many things. I was stubborn, thought I knew what was best for her. When she decided to leave and cut ties with me, I was too proud to reach out afterward. Michael could see Emily was processing too, much at once. The young woman looked at him again as if suddenly remembering his presence. And you? Who are you in this story? I found your grandmother abandoned on the road this afternoon. She told me she wanted to find you. Abandoned? My nephew and his wife couldn't take care of me anymore, Mrs. Margaret explained quickly. They brought me from Allentown here and left me on the road. Left you on the road? Emily repeated, outraged. What do you mean, left you on the road? In the rain, in a wheelchair, with no money, Michael added. It almost turned into a tragedy. Emily's anger was visible. She looked at her grandmother with a mix of pity, rage, and confusion. Come in, please, she finally said, opening the door wide. I can't leave you out here talking about this. Emily's house was small but cozy. A simple living room with a 2-seater sofa, a coffee table covered in papers to grade, a bookshelf filled with textbooks and literature. Michael helped Mrs. Margaret settle in while Emily prepared tea in the kitchen. I can't believe this is happening, Emily murmured, returning with a tray of 3 cups. I thought I had no family left in the world. You have more relatives than just me, Mrs. Margaret said, accepting the teacup with trembling hands. There's my nephew, though he's no longer an option, and there are 2 cousins on your grandfather's side. My grandfather? My husband, Edward. He passed away when your mother was 15. She missed him terribly. Michael sipped his tea quietly, watching the reunion and wondering if he'd done the right thing. The situation was clearly complicated, and he'd put Emily in a tough spot. Mrs. Wilson, he said, breaking the silence, I know this is very sudden. Your grandmother has nowhere to stay tonight, but if it's a problem, I can take her to my place in Pittsburgh. No, Emily said quickly. No, she stays here. She's my grandmother, even if I didn't know she existed until half an hour ago. Are you sure? Michael asked. I don't want to cause trouble for you. I'm sure. It's just... She looked at Mrs. Margaret. I need to understand so many things. I need to know why my mother never mentioned you. I need to know how all these years went. I'll tell you everything, Mrs. Margaret promised. Everything you want to know. Michael stood, sensing it was time for him to leave. Well, then I think my job here is done. I'll let you 2 talk. Wait, Emily said. How can I thank you for what you did? If it weren't for your kindness... Don't mention it. Any decent person would have done the same. But as he walked back to his truck, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the situation. Something in Mrs. Margaret's story didn't sit right with him. The way she'd been abandoned seemed too extreme, even for relatives who no longer wanted the responsibility of caring for her. The next day, Michael couldn't get Mrs. Margaret and Emily out of his head. The whole drive back to Pittsburgh, he wondered if he'd done the right thing. What if Emily couldn't care for her grandmother? What if the young teacher didn't have the financial means or the space for someone in a wheelchair? On impulse, he decided to call the number he'd taken down for Emily. To her surprise, she answered on the first ring. "Hello. Hi, Mrs. Emily. It's Michael, the truck driver. How are things over there?" "Michael, I'm so glad you called. Yesterday was too intense. We talked until very late." "And how's your grandmother feeling?" "Physically, she's fine. I gave her a warm bath, some homemade food, but emotionally, I think she's carrying a heavy burden." "What did she say about the family?" "A lot. About the fight with my mother, about the years she spent alone after my grandfather passed. But there's one thing that bothered me." "What was it?" "The story about my cousin, her nephew's son. According to her, this young man disappeared about 6 months ago. No one knows where he is." Michael frowned. "Disappeared? How?" "She said he started getting involved with the wrong crowd, must have run away from home. But the way she told it, it seems like there's more to it." "What kind of thing?" "I don't know, she gets evasive when I bring it up. She just says her nephew's family changed a lot after their son vanished." Michael was beginning to realize the situation was far more complicated than he'd imagined. "Mrs. Emily, can I ask you something personal? Are you able to take care of your grandmother?" "Financially, it'll be tight. My teacher's salary isn't much, but she has her pension, right? At least she should." "About that, there's a problem. According to her, her nephew took the pension money." "Took it? How?" "She said it was to cover her expenses, but now that she's not there anymore." "You mean they're stealing a 70-year-old woman's pension?" "That's what it seems like." The silence on the other end was telling. Michael could picture Emily processing this disturbing new information. "Michael, can I ask you a favor?" "Of course. Could you come here this weekend? I think I need help sorting out this pension situation, and I think my grandmother trusts you." "No problem, I'll be there Saturday morning." "Thank you, and Michael, thank you for everything. If it weren't for you, I'd never have met my grandmother." After hanging up, Michael grew thoughtful. There was something in Emily's voice that hinted at worry beyond just the money, as if she'd uncovered something about the family that unsettled her. On Friday night, the evening before his visit to Greenfield, Michael got an unexpected call. It was Emily, and she sounded agitated. "Michael, sorry to call so late, but something strange happened." "What was it?" "My grandmother got a call today from her nephew, Richard. He said he's very worried and wants to come get her." "Isn't that good?" "I don't know. My grandmother was terrified, said she doesn't want to go back no matter what. And there's more. He said if she doesn't return willingly, he'll make her." Michael felt a chill in his stomach. "Make her, Sue? How?" "He said she's not in her right mind, that he could get a court order, that he'd prove she can't make decisions on her own." "Can he do that?" "Technically, he can try. If he proves she has dementia or something, he could become her legal guardian and make all her decisions." "But your grandmother is lucid." "I know that, you know that. But a clever lawyer and a compliant doctor could create a messy situation." Michael was starting to understand why Mrs. Margaret had been so frightened. "Did he give a deadline?" "He said he's coming for her on Sunday, wants her ready." "And what are you going to do?" "I don't know. My grandmother is terrified, won't even eat properly. Says she'd rather run away again than go back to Richard's house." "Calm down, Mrs. Emily. Let's think of a solution. I'll be there early tomorrow and we'll figure this out together." "Michael, there's one more thing. My grandmother told me about the grandson who disappeared." "Richard's son? What about him?" "It seems he found out something about his father. Before disappearing, he told my grandmother that Richard was doing wrong things with her money." "What kind of wrong things?" "She doesn't know for sure. But the boy said he saw documents, receipts, said he was going to report his father. And after that, he disappeared?" "Exactly. And ever since, according to my grandmother, Richard became much more controlling. He wouldn't let her go. Out alone, wouldn't allow visitors, kept checking everything she did. The situation was becoming much more serious than Michael had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of a family that didn't want to care for an elderly woman. There seemed to be something criminal involved." Mrs. Emily, have you thought about going to the police? With what proof? It's the word of a 70-year-old woman against a man who could just say she's senile. And the boy who disappeared? No one filed a missing persons report. Officially, he left home because he wanted to. Michael realized they were dealing with a much more complex and dangerous situation than it first appeared. Listen, Mrs. Emily. Tomorrow I'll come early and we'll sit down to talk properly. We'll hear everything your grandmother has to say, and then we'll decide on the best strategy. All right. Michael, I'm scared. Scared of... What? Scared they'll take my grandmother by force. Scared the same thing that happened to the boy will happen to her. The call ended, leaving Michael deeply worried. He had thought he was just helping an abandoned woman find her family. Now it seemed he was in the middle of a situation involving possible embezzlement, and maybe worse. On Saturday morning, Michael arrived in Greenfield earlier than promised. It was only 7 in the morning when he rang Emily's doorbell. The young teacher answered quickly, as if she'd been awake for hours. Michael, I'm so glad you're here. My grandmother barely slept. How is she? Terrified. She keeps saying she doesn't want to go back, that she'd rather run away again. Michael found Mrs. Margaret in the living room, in her wheelchair, staring out the window with an expression of pure fear. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Michael, thank God you came. They're going to take me away. Calm down, Mrs. Margaret. No one's taking you by force. But I need you to tell me everything you know about your nephew. Richard was always ambitious, she began, her voice trembling. Even as a child, he always wanted more than he could have. When my husband died, he became very interested in the inheritance. What inheritance? The house I lived in. It was a good house in downtown Allentown. Edward left everything to me, but Richard always thought he should have gotten part of it. And after you had the stroke, he offered to take care of me. At the time, I thought it was kindness, but I soon realized he wanted me to sell the house and move in with him. Did you sell it? I had to. He said I needed to pay my share of expenses, that I couldn't be a burden on his family. Emily came closer, bringing coffee for everyone. Grandma, tell Michael about little David. Mrs. Margaret took a deep breath before continuing. Little David is my great-nephew, Richard's son, a smart boy, 17 years old. He was always sweet to me, visited me in my room, talked with me. And what happened to him? About 6 months ago, he started asking strange questions. He asked if I knew where my pension money was going, if I had kept the sale documents for the house. Did you have them? I had some papers, yes, kept them in a box under the bed, but one day when I went to look, they weren't there anymore. Did little David take them? I don't know. All I know is that the next week he had a terrible fight with his father. They shouted a lot. Richard even hit the boy. Michael and Emily exchanged worried glances. And after that, little David disappeared. He left home one night and never came back. Richard said he had run off with a girlfriend, but I knew it wasn't true. Little David would have told me if he was going to run away. Why are you so sure of that? Because the day before he disappeared, he came to my room and said, Grandma, if anything happens to me, remember, I tried to do the right thing. That was the last time I spoke to him. The account left everyone in silence. Michael was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Mrs. Margaret, after little David disappeared, how were you treated? It got much worse. Richard wouldn't even let me leave my room alone. He said it was for my safety, but I knew he was afraid I might say something to someone. Something about what? About the money, about the missing documents, about little David. Emily stood up and began pacing the room, visibly agitated. Michael, this is very serious. If what my grandmother is saying is true, this Richard could be committing multiple crimes. That's what I'm thinking. Embezzlement, unlawful confinement, and maybe something worse, murmured Mrs. Margaret. Do you think he did something to little David? Michael asked directly. I don't know. I just know my boy wouldn't run away without saying goodbye to me, and that he was very afraid of his father in those last days. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. The three exchanged glances, and Michael could see the panic in Mrs. Margaret's eyes. "They're here," she whispered. "It's Richard." Emily went to the window and peeked through the curtain. "It's a man in his 50s, bald, with a blonde woman. There's a blue car parked out front." "That's him," confirmed Mrs. Margaret, trembling. "And his wife, Karen." The doorbell rang again, more insistently. "What do we do?" asked Emily. Michael thought quickly. They couldn't just ignore it. Richard knew Mrs. Margaret was there, but they also couldn't let him take her by force. "Let's answer it," Michael decided. "But I'll stay here. I want to hear what he has to say." "Michael, this could be dangerous," Emily warned. "It could be. But we can't leave your grandmother alone in this." Emily took a deep breath and went to open the door. Michael positioned himself so he could hear the conversation without being fully visible. "Good afternoon," said a rough male voice. That must be Emily." "I am, and you are." "I'm Richard Wilson, your grandmother's nephew, and this is my wife, Karen. We've come to take Margaret home." "She is here, yes, but who said she wants to go with you?" "Listen, young lady, I don't know what stories she's told you, but Margaret is ill. She's not capable of making decisions on her own. She seems perfectly lucid to me. She seems that way, but she's not. She has dementia, forgets things, makes up stories. That's why she ran away from home yesterday." Michael could hear the lie in the man's voice. It was calculated, rehearsed. "If she has dementia, why did you abandon her on the side of the road?" "Abandoned her? Who said that? She ran away. We spent the whole night looking for her." "Your grandmother told me a very different version," Emily said, keeping her voice steady. "Well, that just proves she's confused. Young lady, you don't have the means to care for someone with her limitations. We have experience. We've taken care of her for years. Then why doesn't she want to go back? Because she's confused. She doesn't recognize people properly anymore, thinks everyone's out to hurt her. It's typical of the disease." Michael decided it was time to step in. He left the room and walked to the door. "Good afternoon," he said, surprising Richard and Karen. "Who are you?" asked Richard, visibly annoyed by the presence of another person. "Michael Ferreira. I found Mrs. Margaret yesterday on the road. I was the one who brought her here." "Oh, so it was you," said Richard, forcing a smile. "Thank you very much for helping. We were very worried when she disappeared." "I can imagine," replied Michael, not hiding his sarcasm. "So worried that you didn't even bother to look for her on the road where you abandoned her. Like I said, she ran away. We didn't abandon anyone." "Funny, because when I found her, she had been on the road for hours, soaked, freezing, with no food. If you were looking, you weren't looking in the right place." The tension in the air was palpable. Karen, who had stayed silent until then, decided to step in. "Look, we're not going to stand here arguing. Margaret is our responsibility and we're taking her." "Not if she doesn't want to go," Emily said firmly. "She doesn't have a choice," Richard snapped. "I'm her closest relative and she's not capable of living alone." "She's not alone, she's with me." "You? A young woman she barely knows? Do you have any idea what it takes to care for someone in a wheelchair? The costs? The medications? The doctors? The therapy?" "I'll manage." "Manage with what money? A teacher's salary?" Michael realized Richard was trying to intimidate Emily financially. "What about Mrs. Margaret's pension?" he asked. "Wouldn't that help with the costs?" The question hit Richard hard. Michael could see the man hadn't expected them to know about the pension. "Her pension barely covers her medications," Richard lied. "Besides, I have power of attorney to receive it." "A power of attorney that can be revoked," said Michael. "Not by someone deemed mentally unfit." "Who says she's mentally unfit?" "Any doctor who examines her." The threat was clear. Richard was willing to use legal means to force Mrs. Margaret to return, and he'd likely already planned how to do it. "Well, I think it's time we hear from Mrs. Margaret herself," Michael said. "Let's ask her what she wants to do." "She'll say she doesn't want to go because she's confused," Richard said quickly. "It's pointless to ask." "Even so, we'll ask." Michael walked into the living room, followed by Emily. Richard and Karen lingered in the doorway but could see Mrs. Margaret in her wheelchair. "Mrs. Margaret, your nephew is here to take you. Do you want to go with him?" "No," she cried, desperation in her voice. "Please, don't make me go back." "See," said Richard. "She's having an episode. This is how she gets when she's confused." I'm not confused, Mrs. Margaret protested. I know exactly who you are and what you've done. What did they do, Grandma? Asked Emily. They stole my money. They did something to little David, and they treated me like an animal. Little David ran away from home, Richard said quickly. And about the money, she's mixing things up. Where's little David? Michael asked directly. If he ran away, why didn't you file a missing persons report? Because he's an adult and left on his own. 17 is an adult. Richard hesitated for a split second. He just turned 18. When exactly? I don't remember the date. Michael could see the man was lying. The more he spoke, the more he contradicted himself. Look, Richard said, changing tactics. We're not going to stand here arguing. Tomorrow I'll come back with a court order and take Margaret, whether she wants to or not. What kind of court order? Guardianship for mental incapacity. I have witnesses who'll testify she's unfit to live alone. What witnesses? Doctors, neighbors, people who know her condition. Doctors you paid? Asked Michael. Competent doctors who can assess a case of dementia. The threat was being made openly. Richard was saying he had a scheme in place to declare Mrs. Margaret incompetent even if she wasn't. And what if she refuses to go even with a court order? Then the police will come get her. Michael looked at Emily and saw she was pale. The situation was slipping out of their control. All right, said Richard, seemingly satisfied with the effect of his threats. Margaret, take today to say your goodbyes here. Tomorrow you're coming back home. This is my home now, murmured Mrs. Margaret, but her voice was weak, defeated. Your home is with me, where I can take proper care of you. Richard, and Karen turned to leave, but Michael couldn't hold back. One last question, he said. If you care so much about Mrs. Margaret, why did you leave her on a road in the rain? I already told you she ran away. Ran away how? She's in a wheelchair. She managed to leave on her own. A 70-year-old woman in a wheelchair managed to leave the house, get to a road, end up miles away all by herself. She might have gotten a ride. From who? I don't know, some stranger. And this stranger left her in the middle of the road in the rain? Richard was clearly annoyed by the questioning. Look, I don't owe you any explanations. Tomorrow I'll be back with the paperwork, and this ends here. They left, leaving Michael, Emily, and Mrs. Margaret in silence in the room. The feeling was that a storm was approaching. What are we going to do? Asked Emily in a small voice. We'll fight, replied Michael. But we need help. What kind of help? Legal help. Do you know any lawyers here in town? I know Dr. William, who's the father of one of my students, but he mostly handles family cases, divorces, that sort of thing. It might work. Let's go see him today. And there's one more thing we need to do. What? Find little David. Mrs. Margaret lifted her head, a spark of hope in her eyes. Do you think you can find my boy? We'll try, Mrs. Margaret, we'll try. But as he spoke, Michael knew they were facing an uphill battle. Richard had resources, connections, a seemingly well-organized scheme. They only had the truth and the determination not to let an injustice happen. The rest of that afternoon was spent organizing a defense strategy. Michael and Emily managed to speak with Dr. William, who agreed to meet them on Sunday morning before Richard could return with any kind of court order. The case is complex, the lawyer admitted over the phone. Mental incapacity rulings are hard to challenge when the petitioner has witnesses and medical reports. But what if the reports are fake? We'd need to prove they're fake, and that takes time. Time we don't have. Exactly. The best strategy would be to gather evidence that the nephew is acting in bad faith. If we can prove mismanagement of her funds, embezzlement, mistreatment, then we have solid arguments. What about the missing boy? That would be ideal. If we can prove he was threatened or coerced after uncovering irregularities, we'll have a strong case against his father. Dr. William, how much time do we have? If he really gets a guardianship order tomorrow, which I highly doubt can happen that fast, you have the right to appeal, but the order could be enforced immediately. So they could take Mrs. Margaret by force while we file an appeal? Unfortunately, yes. The conversation with the lawyer wasn't encouraging. They needed concrete evidence, and they needed it fast. Michael, said Emily after they hung up, I've been thinking about something. If little David discovered something about irregularities with my grandmother's money, He might have left hidden evidence somewhere. What kind of evidence? Documents, receipts, notes. Something he could use to confront his father. But where would he have hidden it? I don't know. Maybe in the house where my grandmother lived before. What house? The one she sold to go live with Richard. Maybe little David managed to hide something there before the sale. Mrs. Margaret, who had been silently listening to the conversation, suddenly perked up. "The house is still empty," she said excitedly. "What do you mean empty? Richard made me sell it for a low price to a friend of his, but that friend never moved in. The house has been closed up for months." Michael and Emily exchanged glances. It was a long shot, but maybe their only chance. "Mrs. Margaret, do you know where the house keys are? Richard probably has a copy, but I know where a spare is hidden." "Where?" "Under the flower pot, on the back porch. Edward always kept one there for emergencies." "Where is the house located?" 438 St. Peter Street in Allentown." Michael checked his watch. It was already past 5 in the evening. "If we leave now, we'll get there around 7. We still have time to search before it gets completely dark." "Michael, isn't this a bit illegal?" Emily asked, worried. "Technically, the house belonged to your grandmother until just a few months ago. If we find anything proving fraud in the sale, it might even nullify the deal. And if we find nothing, then at least we'll know we tried everything." The decision was made. They would go to Allentown that very night, hoping to find something that could help Mrs. Margaret. The trip to Allentown was tense. Mrs. Margaret was clearly nervous about returning to the town where she had lived for so many years, and where she had endured so much humiliation at the hands of her nephew. "Michael," she said as they entered the town, "what if Richard finds out we're here? He has no reason to suspect. Officially, you're in Greenfield with your granddaughter. But what if someone sees us? At this hour, with so little light, it's unlikely anyone will recognize you." St. Peter Street was a quiet road with old, well-kept houses. Number 438 was a 2-story home with an iron gate and a front garden. It had clearly been abandoned for months, with overgrown grass and signs of neglect. "This is it," Mrs. Margaret said, nostalgia in her voice. "This is the house where I lived with Edward for 40 years. Michael parked the truck a short distance away to avoid drawing attention. Then, carefully, he pushed Mrs. Margaret's wheelchair to the back gate. "The key is under that flower pot there." She pointed to a large ceramic pot on the porch. Michael found the key exactly where she'd said. The back door lock resisted at first, but finally gave way. "Stay here," he told Emily and Mrs. Margaret. "I'll check inside first." The house was dusty and smelled musty, but was in good condition. Michael turned on his phone's flashlight and began exploring the rooms. A simple living room, an old but functional kitchen, 2 bedrooms upstairs. "You can come in," he called. "It's all clear." Emily wheeled Mrs. Margaret inside. The older woman's reaction was immediate and emotional. "My home," she murmured, looking around with tears in her eyes. "How I've missed this place." "Mrs. Margaret, where might little David have hidden documents?" She thought for a moment. "He always liked the attic, said it was the quietest place in the house to study." "There's an attic?" "Yes. The entrance is through. A pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway." Michael went up to the 2nd floor and found the ladder. The attic was small but well organized. There were some old boxes, books and items Mrs. Margaret probably hadn't been able to take when she moved. And there, hidden behind a box of books, Michael found a cardboard folder tied with string. "I found something," he shouted, coming down with the folder. When they opened it, they found exactly what they'd been looking for: documents, bank receipts, handwritten notes, and a letter, clearly written by little David. Emily read the letter aloud. "If someone is reading this, it means something has happened to me. I discovered my father has been stealing Grandma Margaret's money for years, not just her pension, but also the money from the house sale. He forced her to sell it for way too little to a friend of his, and then they split the difference. I have proof of all of it. Bank transfers, fake contracts, everything. I'm going to confront my father, and if he doesn't return Grandma's money, I'll report it all. If something happens to me, please take this evidence to the police. Signed, David Wilson Taylor." The room fell completely silent. They hadn't just found the evidence they needed. They also had confirmation that little David had been threatened for trying to do the right thing. "Michael," Emily said, her voice trembling. "This means Richard is a criminal, and he probably did something to his own son to cover up his crimes." Mrs. Margaret was silently crying. "My boy, my poor boy tried to protect me." "And we'll finish what he started," Michael promised. "With this evidence, Richard won't be able to force you out." But as they gathered the documents, Michael couldn't stop thinking about one disturbing question. If Richard was capable of harming his own son for money, how far would he go to keep his crimes hidden? The drive back to Greenfield was quieter. Everyone was processing the gravity of what they'd uncovered. This wasn't just about a family refusing to care for an elderly woman anymore. It was about serious crimes, embezzlement, and possibly something much worse. "Michael," Emily broke the silence, "what do we do with this evidence?" "First, we make copies of everything. Then we take it to Dr. William first thing tomorrow. With this, he'll know how to proceed." "What if Richard finds out we have the documents?" "That's why we'll make multiple copies and keep them in different places, and we'll scan everything too." "Do you think little David is—" Mrs. Margaret couldn't finish the question. "We don't know, Mrs. Margaret, but we'll find out. With this evidence, we can push for an investigation into his disappearance." By the time they got back to Emily's house, it was past 9. They were exhausted, but there was a sense of hope they hadn't had before. Finally, they had the tools to fight back against Richard. "I'll make tea for everyone," Emily said. "We need to relax a bit before planning our next steps." But the relaxation didn't last long. Around 10, Emily's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello?" "Good evening, Emily, it's Richard." The young teacher tensed immediately. "Good evening, Richard. I've been thinking about our conversation today. I believe we can come to an agreement about Margaret's situation." "What kind of agreement?" "You can keep her. I'll give up guardianship." Emily frowned. The sudden change was too suspicious. Just like that, out of nowhere. "Well, after talking with my wife, we realized it might be better for her to stay with her blood family. With you, her granddaughter." "And what about the pension?" "We can work that out too. I can transfer the power of attorney to you." "Can I know why this sudden change in attitude?" "Like I said, we talked as a family and think it's best for everyone." Michael, who was listening to the conversation, gestured for Emily not to accept anything right away. "Richard, I'll think about your proposal. Let's talk tomorrow, okay?" Of course. I just want you to know, I have no intention of causing trouble. We want what's best for Aunt Margaret." The call ended, leaving everyone suspicious. "This is very strange," said Michael. "This morning he was threatening legal action, and now he's offering a settlement." "Do you think he found out we were at the house?" asked Emily. "Maybe. Or he could be plotting something." Mrs. Margaret, who had stayed silent during the call, suddenly spoke. "I know my nephew. When he acts this nice, it means he's planning something bad." "What kind of thing could he be planning?" "I don't know. But he doesn't give up easily, especially when money's involved." Mrs. Margaret's concern proved justified. On Sunday morning, Michael was woken early by a call from Emily. She was frantic. "Michael, something terrible happened." "What?" "My grandmother got sick in the middle of the night. She's in the hospital." "What do you mean, got sick?" "She started vomiting, had seizures. I called an ambulance, and now the doctors say it might be poisoning." Michael felt his blood run cold. "Poisoning? With what?" "They're still running tests, but—" "Michael!" "Richard showed up here at the hospital. Said he came as soon as he heard that he's very worried." "What time did he get here?" "About 20 minutes after us." "How did he find out so fast she was here?" Emily's question confirmed Michael's worst suspicions. Richard not only knew Mrs. Margaret was in the hospital, he was likely the reason she was there. "Emily, listen carefully. Don't let Richard be alone with your grandmother for even a second. And don't accept anything he offers her. No medicine, no food, nothing." "You think he—" "I think he found out we have evidence against him and is trying to silence your grandmother permanently." "Oh God. Michael, please come here. I'm scared. I'm on my way." "Which hospital?" Greenfield Memorial. Michael dressed quickly and drove faster than he ever had before. The situation was spiraling out of control. If Richard was trying to poison Mrs. Margaret, there was no time left for careful legal strategies. It was a matter of life or death. At the hospital, Michael walked into a tense scene. Emily sat in a chair beside the bed where Mrs. Margaret lay, clearly in serious condition. Richard and Karen stood on the other side, playing the part of concerned relatives. "Michael," Richard said, feigning surprise, "didn't expect to see you here." "I came as soon as I heard. How's Mrs. Margaret?" "The doctors are still running tests," replied the doctor who had just entered the room. "The symptoms suggest poisoning, but we don't know the substance yet." "Doctor," Michael said, "is it possible this was intentional poisoning?" The question brought an uncomfortable silence to the room. Richard reacted with apparent outrage. "How dare you suggest such a thing? I'm just asking if it's possible, medically speaking." "It is possible," the doctor admitted. "The symptoms match. We're running full toxicology tests." "Doctor," Emily said, "can I make a request?" "I'd like any medication or treatment to be approved only by me. I'm her closest relative." "Actually," Richard interrupted, "I have medical power of attorney." "Which may have been obtained fraudulently," Michael said, deciding it was time to show his hand. "How dare you accuse me of fraud? Because we have proof that you've been stealing from Mrs. Margaret for years, and we have reason to believe you did something to your own son when he tried to expose your crimes." Richard's expression changed completely. The mask of the concerned relative fell away, revealing a cold and calculating face. "You don't know what you're talking about." "We know exactly what we're talking about. We have the documents. Little David hid. Bank statements, fraudulent contracts, everything." Karen grabbed Richard by the arm, whispering something in his ear. Michael could see they were debating whether to leave immediately or try to bluff their way out. "If you really think we had anything to do with Margaret's condition," Richard finally said, "why don't you call the police?" "Good idea," Michael replied, pulling out his phone. "That's exactly what I'm going to do." "Wait," Richard said quickly. "We don't need to involve the police. We can settle this among ourselves." "Settle how?" "Look, maybe I made some mistakes managing her funds. I can return everything." "And what about little David?" "Little David is fine. He's living with some relatives out of state." "What relatives? Where?" "I can't say. He asked me not to reveal his location." "Richard," Michael said, stepping closer, "I'm calling the police right now. If you really have nothing to hide, explaining everything to them won't be a problem." "Nuts," Karen shouted, losing control. "You don't understand. If the police get involved, they'll find out everything." "Karen, shut up," Richard snapped, furious at his wife. "Find out what?" Michael pressed. Karen was clearly panicking and began speaking rapidly. "The money from the house, the retirement funds, the fake documents, and what happened to little David when he wanted to tell the truth." "Karen!" Richard yelled, but it was too late. "What happened to little David?" Emily asked, terror in her voice. Karen looked at her husband, then at the others, clearly regretting her outburst. But the damage was done. He wouldn't stay quiet, said he was going to expose everything. Richard tried to reason with him, but what? Michael demanded. There was a fight. Richard pushed him and he hit his head on the corner of the table. The room fell completely silent. Even Mrs. Margaret, who had been barely conscious, seemed to react to the confession. "Is he hurt?" Emily asked. He didn't make it," Karen murmured, starting to cry. The confession hit everyone like a punch to the gut. Richard had caused his own son's death to cover up his financial crimes. "Where's the body?" Michael asked, his voice controlled but ice cold. We buried him at my brother's farm. We pretended he ran away from home." Richard was panicking now, realizing Karen had confessed everything. He looked around like a cornered animal, searching for an escape. "You can't prove anything," he said desperately. "It's your word against ours." "Actually," Michael said, showing his phone, "it's all recorded." The recording of Karen's confession was clearly visible on the screen. Michael had started recording the moment he sensed the situation escalating. "Now I'm calling the..." "Police," he said, dialing the number. "And you're going to explain everything to them." Richard suddenly lunged for the door, but Michael was faster. He blocked the exit while shouting into the hallway, "Security, call the police!" The commotion in the room drew doctors and nurses. Within minutes, the hospital was swarming with officers, and Richard and Karen were arrested on the spot. "You'll need to give statements," the detective told Michael and Emily. "And we'll need all the evidence you mentioned." "We have everything," replied Michael. "Documents, receipts, recordings, everything you need to prosecute this man." As Richard and Karen were led away by the police, Michael approached the hospital bed where Mrs. Margaret was being treated. The elderly woman was awake but still weak from the effects of the poisoning. "Mrs. Margaret, how are you feeling?" "Better," she murmured. "I heard everything. About little David." Tears streamed down her face, and Michael carefully held her hand. "The boy was trying to protect you. He was a hero." "My poor boy. If only I had known." "There was nothing you could have done. Richard was dangerous and little David knew it. That's why he hid the evidence. He wanted the truth to come out. And now, what will happen to me?" Emily stepped closer and took her grandmother's other hand. "Now you'll stay with me, forever. And we'll recover all the money they stole from you, and we'll make sure little David gets the dignified burial he deserves." The case against Richard and Karen made waves throughout the region. The evidence Michael and Emily found in Mrs. Margaret's home was crucial for the couple's conviction. Richard was sentenced for embezzlement, fraud, involuntary manslaughter, and attempted murder by poisoning. Karen was convicted as an accomplice and for concealing a body. Little David's body was found exactly where Karen had indicated, at Richard's brother's farm. The 17-year-old was given the dignified burial he deserved, attended by Mrs. Margaret, who insisted on being there even in a wheelchair. "He was a hero," she said, tossing flowers onto the casket. "He tried to do the right thing, even though he knew it was dangerous." The money stolen from Mrs. Margaret was fully recovered. The fraudulent sale of her house was overturned by the court, and the property was returned to her. Emily suggested selling the house again, this time for a fair price, to secure their financial future. "With that money, we can adapt my home to make it more comfortable for you," said Emily. "Add ramps, modify the bathroom, whatever you need. And there will be enough left for you to take that specialization course you've always wanted," Mrs. Margaret added. "Little David would be happy knowing his sacrifice helped a teacher further her education." Michael stayed involved throughout the process, becoming a constant presence in Mrs. Margaret and Emily's lives. Gradually, a deep friendship blossomed among the three. "Michael," Emily said one day, 3 months after the events at the hospital, "you changed our lives. If it weren't for you, I'd just be a lonely trucker driving down the highways," he replied. "You gave me the family I never had." It was true. Michael had lost his parents young and never married. Living alone on the road had been his way of coping with loneliness. But now, having met Mrs. Margaret and Emily, he realized what he'd been missing. "I have a proposal for you," he said. "How about I move to Greenfield? I can work doing regional deliveries, stay closer." "Michael, you'd do that?" Mrs. Margaret asked, touched. "I would. In fact, I already am. I bought a house 2 blocks from here." Their surprise was complete. Michael had planned everything in secret, wanting it to be a happy surprise. "Now you have a protective neighbor," he said, smiling. Life in Greenfield became peaceful and joyful for the three of them. Mrs. Margaret regained not only her physical health, but also her joy for life. Having her granddaughter close and knowing the truth about little David had been revealed brought peace to her heart. Emily flourished like never before. With her financial situation resolved and her grandmother's presence giving meaning to her life, she became an even better teacher. Her students loved when she brought Mrs. Margaret to tell stories from the past, and Michael discovered that happiness wasn't on lonely roads, but in the family he had chosen. He adjusted his work routine to spend more time with the 2 women who had changed his life. "You know," Mrs. Margaret said one afternoon as the 3 of them had tea in the garden, "sometimes the most terrible things in life end up leading to the most beautiful ones." "How so, Grandma?" "If Richard hadn't abandoned me on that road, I would never have met Michael. And if it weren't for Michael, I would never have found you. And I would never have discovered I had a grandmother, Emily added. And I would never have discovered I could have a family, Michael finished. They sat in silence for a moment, each reflecting on the strange paths life sometimes takes. There's one more thing, Mrs. Margaret said, breaking the silence. I've decided to do something in memory of little David. What, Grandma? I want to create a scholarship for underprivileged youth at the school where you work. A scholarship in David Wilson Taylor's name, so people remember a brave boy who fought for the truth. Grandma, that's beautiful, Emily said, tears in her eyes. And I'll set one condition. The scholarship will go to students who demonstrate not just intelligence, but moral courage. Young people who aren't afraid to do the right thing, even when it's hard. Like little David did, Michael said. Exactly like little David did. The David Wilson Taylor Scholarship was created 6 months later, with an emotional ceremony at the school. Mrs. Margaret made sure to be there and told all the students the story of her brave grandson who chose to risk everything rather than let an injustice happen. I hope you learn from his story, she told the young crowd, that you have the courage to always do what's right, even when it's hard, even when it's dangerous. The first scholarship recipient was a 15-year-old boy named John from a very poor family who had reported a cheating scheme at school, even though he knew he'd be bullied by his classmates. You remind me so much of little David, Mrs. Margaret told John at the scholarship ceremony. You have the same courage, the same sense of justice. Mrs. Margaret, the boy asked, doesn't it make you sad to remember your grandson? It does, my dear, but it also makes me proud. And when I see brave boys like you, I feel like he hasn't completely left us. His spirit lives on in every young person who chooses to do what's right. The ceremony was an important moment of closure for Mrs. Margaret. She had found a way to turn her pain into something positive, something that would honor little David's memory and help other young people. At the end of the day, Michael, Emily, and Mrs. Margaret returned home together. It was a scene that had become routine. Michael pushing the wheelchair, Emily walking beside them, the three chatting about the day's events. Michael, Mrs. Margaret said, "Can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Mrs. Margaret." "Do you regret stopping to help me that rainy afternoon?" Michael stopped pushing the wheelchair and knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Mrs. Margaret, that was the best decision I ever made in my entire life. Finding you two didn't just do good for you, it saved me too." "How so?" "I was just existing, not really living. I spent my days on the road with no purpose, no family, no meaning. You gave me all of that. And you gave us a second chance," Emily said, "a chance to be a family." "Then we're all in each other's debt," Mrs. Margaret smiled. "How wonderful that fate brought us together on that wet road," they began, walking home again, now in contemplative silence, each thinking about how one rainy afternoon had changed 3 lives forever. At home, Emily prepared dinner while Michael helped Mrs. Margaret with the physical therapy exercises she did every day. It was a routine that had formed naturally, each contributing what they could to the well-being of the family they had built. "Emily," Mrs. Margaret said during dinner, "don't you miss having a boyfriend? A pretty girl like you should be thinking about marriage, having children." Emily blushed slightly. "Grandma, I'm happy as things are, taking care of you, working, living our quiet life. But you're young, you still have so much to experience. And I am experiencing it. Maybe not in the traditional way, but I'm happy." Michael, who had been silently observing the conversation, decided to step in. "Mrs. Margaret, everyone has their own timing for things. Emily will know when the right moment comes." "And what about you, Michael? Have you never thought about getting married?" "I have, yes, but I never found the right person, and now I'm fine like this. I have you all, I have my family. You two are both too young to give up on romantic love," Mrs. Margaret insisted. "Life has many surprises in store." Her comment created a subtle moment of awkwardness between Michael and Emily. There was indeed a special affection between them, but neither had dared to name that feeling. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. A few days later, Michael received an unexpected invitation. The city of Greenfield wanted to honor him for his exemplary actions in Mrs. Margaret's case. The mayor had decided to grant him the title of honorary citizen. "Michael, this is wonderful," Emily said when he shared the news. "I don't know if I deserve such an honor," he replied modestly. "Of course you do," Mrs. Margaret said. "You saved my life, and you helped bring justice for little David. Any decent person would have done the same. No, Michael, many people would have walked right by, thinking it wasn't their problem. You chose to get involved. You chose to help." The award ceremony was scheduled for the following week in the City Hall's Grand Chamber. Michael was nervous about speaking in public, but Emily and Mrs. Margaret encouraged him. "You just need to speak from the heart," Emily said. "Tell them why you decided to help my grandmother, and why you kept helping even when things got dangerous," Mrs. Margaret added. On the day of the ceremony, the hall was full. Along with city officials, there were teachers and students from Emily's school, neighbors and curious onlookers who had followed the case in the local papers. The mayor gave an emotional speech about the importance of solidarity and civic courage. Then he called Michael forward to receive the honor. "Michael Ferreira," the mayor said, "you've taught us that being a citizen isn't just about having rights. It's also about having the courage to act when we see injustice being done." Michael accepted the certificate and medal, clearly moved. When it was his turn to speak, he looked out at the audience and met the eyes of Mrs. Margaret and Emily in the front row. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice slightly unsteady, "I don't consider myself a hero. I just did what anyone with a bit of humanity would do." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When I saw Mrs. Margaret on that road, in the pouring rain, I wasn't thinking about heroism or citizenship. I just thought, here's someone who needs help. And when we discovered the situation was much more serious than we had imagined, I didn't think about danger or consequences either. I only thought about doing the right thing." The audience listened in respectful silence. "But I want to say one thing. I didn't save Mrs. Margaret, she saved me, and Emily too. They gave me something I didn't know I was searching for. A family. A purpose. A reason to wake up every day with joy." Tears began to well up in the eyes of many in the audience. "That's why I dedicate this honor not to myself, but to all those who have the courage to make a difference in someone's life. And especially to David Wilson Taylor, a brave young man who lost his life trying to protect his grandmother. He was the true hero." The audience rose in prolonged applause. Michael stepped down from the stage and went straight to hug Mrs. Margaret and Emily, who were crying with emotion. "Thank you," Mrs. Margaret whispered in his ear, "for everything." After the ceremony, there was a small reception. Several people approached Michael to congratulate him and share their own stories of solidarity and courage. "You inspired me," said a young nurse. "I work at the hospital and sometimes feel discouraged. But your story reminded me why I chose this profession." "Keep helping people," Michael replied. "The world needs more people like you." An elderly gentleman also approached. "My name is Charles," he said. "I knew little David. He really was a special boy. You did him justice. How did you know little David?" "I was his high school teacher here in Greenfield. He studied here for a while before returning to Allentown." "What was he like as a student?" "Smart. Inquisitive. He always asked about ethics, about how to act when we see something wrong happening. He said he wanted to study law to help people who'd been wronged." The information moved Michael deeply. Little David hadn't acted on impulse when he decided to confront his father. It was the result of a moral conviction that had been forming for a long time. "Professor Charles," Michael said, "would you like to meet Mrs. Margaret? She'd love to talk to someone who knew little David as a student. It would be an honor." Michael led the professor to where Mrs. Margaret was speaking with the mayor and other guests. "Mrs. Margaret, this is Professor Charles. He taught little David." Her eyes lit up immediately. "Professor, what a joy to meet you. Tell me about my boy in school." "Mrs. Margaret, David was one of my favorite students, always engaged, always questioning, always concerned about social justice. He was always like that, even as a little boy," she said, pride in her voice. "I remember once he wrote an essay on moral courage. He said true courage isn't the absence of fear, but doing the right thing even when afraid. That sounds just like him, Mrs. Margaret murmured, moved. Mrs. Margaret, may I suggest something? What if we publish David's writings in a collection to preserve his ideas and inspire other young people? The suggestion excited not only Mrs. Margaret but also Emily. What a wonderful idea, Emily said. We could use it in schools as study material on ethics and citizenship. And donate the royalties to the David Wilson Taylor Scholarship, Michael suggested. Perfect, Mrs. Margaret agreed. Little David would be happy knowing his ideas continue to help others. The book project became a positive obsession for the group. Professor Charles volunteered to oversee the editing. Emily took charge of the educational aspects, and Michael handled the practical details of publication. For weeks, they gathered at Emily's house to organize little David's writings. The young man had left behind a surprising amount of material: essays, personal reflections, poems. Look at this text, said Professor Charles one afternoon, reading aloud. Injustice exists only because good people stay silent. Every time we see something wrong and do nothing, we become accomplices. That's why we can't be afraid to speak, to act, to make waves. He really thought like a philosopher, commented Emily. And like an activist, added Michael. It wasn't just theory for him, it was a way of life. And it was that way of life that led him to confront his own father, said Mrs. Margaret with a mix of pride and sadness. The book was completed in 2 months. It was titled The Courage to Do Right, Reflections by David Wilson Taylor. The launch ceremony was held at the school where Emily worked, attended by students, teachers, and local officials. This book, said Mrs. Margaret at the ceremony, is proof that my grandson did not leave us in vain. His ideas live on, inspiring new generations to be brave and just. The first copy was donated to the school library with a special dedication to all the young people who, like David, have the courage to dream of a fairer world. The book's success was immediate. Other schools in the area began adopting it as study material. Philosophy and sociology teachers used it in their classes. And most importantly, young people from all over the city started seeking out Mrs. Margaret to talk about little David's ideas. Mrs. Margaret, said a young student who came to visit her, I read David's book and I want to be like him. I want to have the courage to make a difference. And what do you plan to do, dear? I'm organizing a student group to expose corruption in our school's student council. The leaders are embezzling money, and everyone knows, but no one says anything. Aren't you afraid? I am. But as David wrote, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid. Conversations like this became frequent. Mrs. Margaret found she had become an informal counselor for young people facing moral dilemmas. Michael, she said one evening, I never imagined my home would become a meeting place for young activists. Does it bother you? On the contrary, I love it. I feel like little David is here through them, and they're learning a lot from you too. I hope so. I hope I'm helping them become better people. Emily was also positively influenced by the movement that had grown around little David's memory. Her teaching methods became more dynamic, more focused on practical issues of ethics and citizenship. Teacher, one of her students asked during class, how do you know when something is worth fighting for? That's an excellent question, John. What do you all think? I think it's worth it when it's a matter of justice, one student answered, and when a lot of people could be hurt if we stay silent, added another. You're both right, said Emily. But there's one more important thing. It's worth fighting when you can sleep peacefully knowing you tried to do what was right. The discussion continued throughout the class, with students sharing personal examples and reflecting on their responsibilities as citizens. After class, Emily realized how much her life had changed. Before meeting the grandmother and going through that experience with Michael, she had been a competent teacher but limited to traditional material. Now she felt she was truly shaping citizens. That evening, during family dinner, she shared her thoughts. You know, I think we've all changed a lot since that rainy afternoon. How so? Asked Michael. You, Michael, stopped being a lonely truck driver and became a community leader. Everyone in town knows you, respects you. And you? Asked Mrs. Margaret. I stopped being just a teacher and became a true educator. Now I feel like I'm making a difference in my students' lives. And me, said Mrs. Margaret. I stopped being a useless old lady and became a mentor for idealistic young people. You were never useless, Mrs. Margaret, Michael protested. I felt useless. I thought my life was over after the stroke. But now I see that maybe I needed to go through all that to get here. To what exactly? To this purpose, to this family, to this way of honoring little David's memory. The silence that followed was contemplative and comforting, each of them reflecting on the unexpected turns life had taken. Can I make a confession? Said Michael. Of course, the two women replied in unison. Sometimes when I'm driving down the road where I found Mrs. Margaret, I stop at the exact spot and give thanks. I thank the rain, the terrible situation for everything that brought us here. Michael, murmured Mrs. Margaret, moved. It's true. If it weren't for that awful afternoon, the three of us would just be strangers living separate lives. Now we're a real family. A chosen family, said Emily. The best kind of family, Mrs. Margaret added. 6 months after the release of little David's book, the three of them had settled into a happy, productive routine. Michael had bought a small transport business in Greenfield, specializing in local moves and deliveries. This allowed him to stay in town more, close to his chosen family. Emily had been offered a position as the school's curriculum coordinator in recognition of her innovative work with citizenship education. The David Wilson Taylor Scholarship had expanded, now supporting 5 underprivileged students each year, and Mrs. Margaret had become a respected figure in the community. Besides mentoring young activists, she had joined the Municipal Council for Senior Rights, using her experience to help others facing the same struggles she had endured. Mrs. Margaret, the council president said during a meeting, your perspective is invaluable. You've lived through the very issues we're trying to address, and I hope my experience can spare other families from going through what mine did. You're succeeding. The senior protection bill you helped draft will be voted on at the City Council next month. The bill was one of Mrs. Margaret's proudest achievements. Based on her own experience, it created safeguards against financial exploitation of seniors and established harsher penalties for abandoning vulnerable individuals. If this bill had existed before, she told Michael and Emily, maybe little David wouldn't have had to face his father alone. There would have been other ways to report what was happening. And now other little Davids will have those protections, said Emily. It's the best way to honor his memory. One afternoon, while Mrs. Margaret hosted a group of college students interested in her ideas on senior activism, Michael and Emily found themselves alone in the garden. It was a situation that had been happening more often lately, always carrying a subtle tension between them. The affection and admiration they felt for each other were deepening into something more, but neither had found the courage to address. Emily, Michael finally said, breaking the awkward silence. Yes? Can I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy with the life we're living? Very happy. Why? It's just that sometimes I wonder if you don't miss other things. Going out, dating, experiencing things people your age usually do. Emily fell silent for a moment, clearly thinking about her answer. Michael, I'm happy the way things are. But sometimes I wonder if it's possible to be even happier. What do you mean? Sometimes I think about what it would be like if we were more than friends and caretakers for my grandmother. Emily's confession left Michael speechless. It was exactly what he had been thinking, but hadn't had the courage to say. Emily, I'm sorry, she said quickly. I shouldn't have said that. It could complicate our friendship, our family. No, don't apologize. I've been thinking the same thing. They looked into each other's eyes for the first time in a different way, no longer as friends or caretaking partners, but as two people discovering a new feeling. What now? Emily asked. I don't know. I'm afraid of ruining what we have. Me too. Our family means everything to me. To me too. They were interrupted by Margaret calling from inside the house. Michael, Emily, Come here, the boys want to meet you too. The intimate moment faded, but something had shifted between them. A possibility had opened, and now it was impossible to pretend it didn't exist. During dinner that night, Margaret noticed something different in the air. You two are very quiet today, she observed. Did something happen? No, Grandma, we were just thinking. Thinking about what? Michael and Emily exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to respond. About how our lives have changed, Michael finally said. Changed for the better, I hope. Definitely for the better, Emily agreed. But sometimes changes bring new possibilities, Michael said, choosing his words carefully. Margaret looked between them, and a slow smile spread across her face. Ah, I see, she said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. See what? Emily asked, blushing. You're finally realizing you like each other? Margaret's direct observation left them both even more flustered. Grandma, Emily, my dear, I'm not blind or deaf. For months, I've noticed how you look at each other, how you care for one another. And what do you think about that? Michael asked. I think it's wonderful. You're two special people who met in a special situation and built a special family. Why couldn't you be happy together too? But what about our family? Wouldn't everything change? Of course it would change. It would get even better. Margaret's enthusiastic approval eased the tension Michael and Emily had been feeling. Are you sure it wouldn't bother you? Emily asked. My dear granddaughter, I just want you both to be happy. And if you're happy together, I'll be happy seeing you happy. What if it doesn't work? Michael asked. If we try and it fails? Then you go back to being friends and keep taking care of me, Margaret said pragmatically. But if you don't try, you'll always wonder, what if? The elderly woman's simple wisdom made sense to both of them. They had faced much harder things together. Why couldn't they also face the possibility of a relationship? So what do we do? Emily asked. We take it slow, Michael replied. See how we feel. No rush, no pressure. With the family advisor's approval, Margaret said, referring to herself with humor. The three of them laughed and the tension finally dissolved completely. In the days that followed, Michael and Emily began to carefully explore the new dimension of their relationship. They didn't drastically change their routine, but started including small gestures that hinted at their mutual interest. Michael began bringing flowers for Emily, always with the excuse that they were to brighten up the house. Emily started cooking special dishes she knew he liked. They began taking evening walks together after putting Margaret to bed. How are you both feeling about this new phase? Margaret asked a week later. Good, Emily replied. It's strange but nice. Strange how? It feels natural and new at the same time. We know each other so well in some ways, but we're discovering completely new sides too. And you, Michael? I'm happy, he said simply. Happier than I thought I could be. Well, then you have my official blessing, Margaret declared solemnly, and my expectation that if all goes well, I'll be a great grandmother someday. The statement drew embarrassed laughter, but also warmed their hearts. The prospect of a future together was starting to seem not just possible, but desirable. 2 months later, Michael and Emily had made their relationship official. There were no grand, dramatic declarations, just a simple conversation under a full moon. Emily, Michael said as they walked through the town square, I love you. I love you too, she replied without hesitation. What does that mean for us? It means we're a family in the fullest sense possible. You, me, my grandmother, and maybe others in the future. Others? Children, she said, blushing slightly. If you want, of course. I do, I really do. They kissed right there in the square, under the glow of the old streetlights. It was the first kiss for both of them in many years, and it marked not just the start of a romance, but the solidification of a family born from tragic circumstances and transformed into something beautiful. When they returned home, Margaret was waiting in the living room with tea and cookies. So? She asked with a mischievous smile. So what, Grandma? Did you finally kiss? The direct question made them laugh. How did you know? You left the house looking like friends and came back looking like a couple. Not hard to figure out. And you approve? I approve and celebrate, she said, raising her teacup as if in a toast. To our family, which began on a wet road and found true love. A year later, Michael and Emily married in a simple yet moving ceremony at the main church in Greenfield. Margaret was their matron of honor, seated in a wheelchair adorned with white flowers. Dearly beloved, the priest began, but quickly corrected himself. Dear friends, we are here not just to celebrate the union of Michael and Emily, but also the solidification of a family born from kindness and grown in love. The couple's story had become well known throughout the town, and the church was filled with people eager to witness this special moment. Michael, the priest said, do you take Emily to be your wife, to love and cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, Michael answered, looking into Emily's eyes. Emily, do you take Michael to be your husband, to love and cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do, she replied, tears of happiness in her eyes. Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Michael, you may kiss the bride. The kiss was long and emotional as the church erupted in applause. Mrs. Margaret wept with joy, seeing her family come together in such a beautiful way. At the celebration, held in the town's community hall, Mrs. Margaret insisted on giving a speech. My dears, she said, her voice trembling with emotion, today isn't just the wedding of Michael and Emily. It's a celebration of how God works in mysterious ways in our lives. The audience listened in respectful silence. 2 years ago, I was in a desperate situation, abandoned, sick, without hope. If someone had told me I'd be here today, watching my granddaughter marry the man who saved my life, I wouldn't have believed it. But life has taught us that the greatest joys sometimes come after the deepest sorrows, that the strongest families are the ones we choose, not just the ones we're born into. She looked directly at the bride and groom. Michael, you didn't just save me on that road. You gave us the chance to be a real family. Emily, you gave me the chance to know my granddaughter and to be a real grandmother. And the two of you gave me the chance to see that it's worth fighting for our values, even when the world seems unfair, like my little David did. The mention of little David brought tears to the eyes of many present who knew the story. So, I pray that you'll always be happy, that you'll have beautiful, smart children, and that you'll teach those children to be as brave as little David was, to help those in need like Michael did, to love without limits like we've all learned to do. The speech ended with a standing ovation, and many guests were visibly moved. Now, Mrs. Margaret concluded with a mischievous smile, I want to see my great-grandchildren as soon as possible. The declaration brought laughter and fresh applause, marking the perfect ending to a perfect day. 6 months after the wedding, Emily discovered she was pregnant. The news was met with euphoria by the whole family. Michael, she said, showing him the pregnancy test, we're going to have a baby. His reaction was immediate. He scooped her up and spun her around the room, laughing with joy. Really? We're going to be parents? We're going to be parents. They rushed to share the news with Mrs. Margaret, who was in the living room watching TV. Grandma, we have news, Emily said, barely able to contain her excitement. What news? You're going to be a great grandmother. Mrs. Margaret's reaction was even more dramatic than Michael's. She shrieked with joy, opened her arms to hug them both, and began laughing and crying at the same time. Oh my God! Oh my God! I'm going to be a great grandmother. Yes, Mrs. Margaret, in 8 months. And will it be a boy or a girl? It's too early to know, but do you have a preference? No, I just want them to be healthy and look like the two of you. Emily's pregnancy was smooth and happy. Mrs. Margaret threw herself into the preparations, offering advice about baby clothes, food, and childcare. It was as if she were reliving her own experiences as a mother and grandmother. Michael, she said one day, are you ready to be a father? I don't think anyone's ever completely ready, but I'm excited. And a little scared too. Little, it's a huge responsibility. It is, but you two will be wonderful parents. I'm sure of it. How can you be so sure? Because you've already taken such good care of me. If you can handle a stubborn old lady like me, you can handle a baby. When there were 3 months left until the birth, they found out it would be a boy. The news brought a special dimension to the whole family. "Michael," Emily said one night, "I've been thinking about a name." "What name?" "David, in honor of little David." Michael fell silent for a moment, clearly moved by the suggestion. "Are you sure?" "I am. I think it would be a beautiful way to keep his memory alive in our family." "And your grandmother, what does she think?" "I haven't talked to her yet. I wanted to know your opinion first. I think it's a beautiful idea. Little David would be like an older brother to our son." When they shared the idea with Mrs. Margaret, her reaction was even more emotional than they had expected. "You want to name my great-grandson David?" "Yes, Grandma, if you agree." "Agree," she said, tears in her eyes. "It's the most beautiful thing you could do for my boy." Then it's settled. David Ferreira Wilson. "David Ferreira Wilson," Mrs. Margaret repeated, savoring the name. "My great-grandson David." David's birth was an event that mobilized the entire town of Greenfield. The family's story had become legendary in the area, and many people followed the developments with affection. At the hospital, the waiting room was filled not only with relatives but also friends, Emily's co-workers, students who had benefited from the David Wilson Taylor Scholarship, and even people who had simply been inspired by Michael and Mrs. Margaret's story. "He's a beautiful, healthy boy," the doctor announced. 7 pounds 20 inches. "How are mother and baby?" Michael asked anxiously. "Both doing very well, you can see them now." Michael entered the room where Emily was holding the baby. It was the first time he saw his son, and the emotion was overwhelming. "Hi, Daddy," Emily said with a tired but radiant smile. "Want to meet your son?" Michael approached slowly, as if afraid to break something precious. When he saw the baby's small, perfect face, he began to cry. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. Want to hold him?" With trembling hands, Michael held his son for the first time. The baby opened his big dark eyes as if studying his father's face. "Hi, David," Michael whispered. "I'm your daddy, and I'll take care of you forever." A few minutes later, they brought Mrs. Margaret in a wheelchair to meet her great-grandson. The great-grandmother's emotion was indescribable. "My boy," she said, her voice shaking. "My little David. Want to hold him, Grandma?" "May I?" Michael carefully placed the baby in Mrs. Margaret's arms. A nurse captured the moment in a photograph, creating an image that would become the family's most treasured. "Look at you," Mrs. Margaret said to the baby. "You're named after your great-uncle, who was a hero, and you have a family that loves you so, so much." The baby seemed to listen to every word, his alert little eyes fixed on his great-grandmother's face. "And you know what, my little David? Your story began on a wet road with your daddy saving your great-grandma, so you're truly a child of love and kindness." In the months that followed, David became the center of attention for both family and community. Mrs. Margaret, despite her age and physical limitations, proved to be a devoted and loving great-grandmother. "Michael," she said one day as she cradled her great-grandson, "I never imagined I could be this happy at my age." "Why, Mrs. Margaret?" "Because I thought my life was over when I ended up in a wheelchair. I thought I'd just be a burden to everyone. And now I see I still had so much to live for, to learn, to teach, to love. You've taught all of us so much. And you've taught me it's never too late to start over. That family isn't just blood. It's a choice. It's love." Emily, who was breastfeeding David, joined the conversation. "Grandma, what do you think little David would say about all this?" "I think he'd be happy," Mrs. Margaret replied without hesitation. "He always wanted justice, and we got justice. He always wanted me to be happy, and I'm so happy. And now he has a namesake who will grow up knowing his story." "Will we tell David everything when he's older?" "Yes. He needs to know where he comes from, how our family came to be. You need to know about courage, about doing the right thing, and about how good people find each other, even in the worst circumstances," added Michael. When David turned 1, the family organized a party that became a milestone in the life of the Greenfield community. The community hall was decorated with photos that told the whole story, from the picture of Michael shielding Mrs. Margaret from the rain, through the wedding, to the first photos of David. "My dear friends," said Michael, giving a speech during the party, 3 years ago I was just a lonely truck driver. Today I have a wonderful family, a community that welcomed me, and a beautiful son." The audience listened intently, many intimately familiar with every detail of the story. But what I want to say today isn't just about our happiness. It's about the importance of being open to opportunities to help one another. When I stopped to help Mrs. Margaret on that road, I thought I was just doing a favor for a lady in distress. I never imagined I was changing my own life forever. So, my request to all of you is, don't walk past when you see someone in need. Don't think it's not your problem, because we never know how a simple gesture can transform not just the life of the person receiving help, but also the life of the one who helps. The speech was interrupted several times by emotional applause. And to my son, David, who doesn't understand the words yet but will one day read this speech, Michael continued, "I want to leave a message. You were born from a love story that began with kindness. Never forget that, and never stop doing good, even when it seems hard or dangerous. Because doing good isn't just about helping others, it's about becoming the person you're meant to be. It's about honoring the memory of those who inspired us. It's about building a better world for future generations." The speech ended with a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. 2 years later, when David was starting to say his first words, Mrs. Margaret made an unexpected suggestion. "Michael, Emily, don't you think it's time for you to have another child?" The question caught the couple by surprise. "Another child," Emily repeated. "It's just that David is growing up, and I won't live forever. I'd like to see you with more children before I go." "Grandma, don't talk like that," Emily protested. "It's the truth, my dear. I'm 75, I've had a stroke, I've been through a lot. Every day is a gift. But you're in good health." "I am, thank God. But I want to make the most of the time I have left to help you with the children." Michael and Emily exchanged glances. They had in fact talked about having more children but hadn't made a final decision. "What do you think?" Michael asked. "I'd love to have more children," Emily admitted. "David needs siblings. And I'd love more grandchildren," said Mrs. Margaret, "especially if it's a girl this time." The conversation planted a seed that grew quickly. 3 months later, Emily was pregnant again, to the joy of the whole family. "This time I want it to be a girl," said Mrs. Margaret, stroking Emily's still small belly. "And if it's a boy, then I'll want another one until a girl comes." Mrs. Margaret's comment made everyone laugh, but it also revealed her deep desire to see the family grow as much as possible. "Grandma, how many grandchildren do you want?" "As many as God sends. I lost so much time without knowing you all, and now I want to make up for it by seeing this house full of children." Emily's second pregnancy was harder than the first, but she had the full support of Michael and Mrs. Margaret. The most interesting part was seeing how David, even at just 2 years old, seemed to understand something special was happening. "Mommy baby," he said, pointing to Emily's belly. "That's right, sweetheart. Mommy has a baby in her belly." "David baby?" "David is the baby's brother. David is going to be the big brother." The idea of being the big brother delighted David, who started talking to his mother's belly and giving it sweet little kisses. When they found out it would be a girl, Mrs. Margaret was overjoyed. I knew it would be a girl." "How did you know?" "Great-grandmother's intuition," she said mysteriously. "And what name will we give her?" asked Michael. "Can I make a suggestion?" said Mrs. Margaret. "Of course. Olivia, in honor of my daughter, Emily's mother." The suggestion moved Emily deeply. "Olivia," she repeated with tears in her eyes. "My daughter will have my mother's name. I think your mother would be happy knowing her memory will live on through her granddaughter." "Then it's decided. Olivia Wilson Taylor." Olivia was born on a sunny spring morning, weighing 7.5 pounds. If David had been a calm baby, Olivia was the opposite. Expressive, vocal, clearly determined to make her presence known. "Look at this," said Mrs. Margaret, holding her great-granddaughter for the first time. "This one's going to keep us busy." "Why do you say that?" Look at her little ways. She's observing everything, paying attention to everything. She's going to be sharp, just like her mother. And stubborn like her great-grandmother, added Michael, teasing. Not stubborn, determined, corrected Mrs. Margaret. Determined women change the world. With 2 small children, the household dynamics changed completely. Michael proved to be a devoted and present father, always helping with the kids despite his work. Emily adjusted her school schedule to spend more time at home, especially during Olivia's first few months. Mrs. Margaret, now 76, became a tireless great-grandmother. Even limited by her wheelchair, she oversaw everything related to the children with the experience of someone who had raised kids in a very different era. "Emily," she'd say whenever she saw her granddaughter running after the 2 little ones, "you're working yourself to death. In my day, women had more help from family. I have help, Grandma. I have Michael, and I have you. But it's not enough. You need more time to rest." Mrs. Margaret's concern was justified. Emily was clearly exhausted, juggling work at school, caring for 2 babies, and looking after her grandmother. Even with all of Michael's help, who made sure to take on his share of household responsibilities, the strain was evident. "Michael," Mrs. Margaret said in a private conversation, "we need to find a nanny to help Emily." "I've thought about that, Mrs. Margaret, but the budget is tight. 2 small kids cost a lot. What if I paid for it? You don't need to spend your money on that. That's exactly what money is for, Michael, to help family when they need it." Mrs. Margaret's insistence revealed deep concern for Emily's well-being. She'd noticed her granddaughter was losing weight, sleeping little, and sometimes snapping from sheer exhaustion. "Listen," she finally said, "I'll put an ad in the local paper. Looking for a trustworthy young woman to help with the kids a few hours a day." "Mrs. Margaret, no arguments about this. It's my contribution to our family." 2. Weeks later, they found Jessica, a 20-year-old who had recently moved to Greenfield with her husband. She had experience with children and was looking for part-time work. "I'd love to help you," Jessica said during the interview. "Working with kids is what I enjoy most." "And do you have references?" asked Michael cautiously. "Yes, I do. I worked at a daycare in New York for 2 years before moving here." Mrs. Margaret liked the young woman immediately. There was something about Jessica that reminded her of herself when she was young, determined, caring, but also with an inner strength that shone through her eyes. "Jessica," she said, "can I ask you a personal question? Why did you move to Greenfield?" "My husband got a job at a factory here, and I thought it would be nice to live in a smaller, quieter town." "And your family? Are they far away?" Jessica's face darkened slightly. "I don't have any family left. I lost my parents in an accident 3 years ago. It's just me and my husband now." The information created an immediate connection between Jessica and the rest of the family. Everyone there knew what it was like to lose important people and find a new family. "Welcome to our family, Mrs. Margaret said, reaching out to the young woman. Jessica's arrival brought instant relief to the whole household. She proved not only capable with the children, but also warm and devoted. David and Olivia took to her right away, and Emily finally got a chance to catch her breath. "Mrs. Margaret," Emily said a week later, "you made the right choice. Jessica is wonderful. I knew she'd fit in. She has a good heart. And she's been such a big help. I even managed to grade papers calmly yesterday." "And how are you feeling?" "Better, much better, less tired, less stressed." But the peace didn't last long. 3 weeks after Jessica arrived, Michael noticed something strange during one of his deliveries. He was coming back from a neighboring town when he spotted a car that seemed to be following him. At first, he thought it was a coincidence. But after taking 2 unnecessary turns and seeing the car still behind him, he knew he was being tailed. Michael decided not to go straight home. Instead, he drove to the Greenfield police station. The car that had been following him drove right past as he pulled into the station's parking lot. "Officer," Michael said to the duty sergeant, "I think someone's following me. Any idea who it might be?" "It could be related to the Richard Wilson case. He was convicted 2 years ago, but there might still be people on the outside involved." They'll file a report and increase patrols in your area. But be careful, Michael. If someone really is after you, it could be dangerous. Michael returned home worried, but decided not to say anything to Emily or Mrs. Margaret to avoid scaring them. Still, he started taking extra precautions, varying his schedule and routes, always checking if he was being followed, and giving Jessica clear instructions not to open the door for strangers. 2 days later, his precautions proved necessary. Jessica called him at work, clearly nervous. "Michael, there's a man in front of the house who's been there for over an hour. He keeps looking at the window, making phone calls, but he won't leave." "What does he look like?" "About 40, bald, wearing a black jacket. He's in a grey car." The description matched the car that had followed Michael days earlier. "Jessica, listen carefully. Lock all the doors and windows. Don't leave the house for any reason, and if he tries to get in, call the police immediately." "I'm scared, Michael. It's going to be okay. I'm on my way home now." Michael cancelled his deliveries for the day and hurried back to Greenfield. When he reached his street, the grey car was gone, but he knew the danger was real. "Jessica," he said as he walked inside, "how are the kids?" "They're fine. David's playing. Olivia's asleep. But that man really shook me." "Did he say anything?" "No, he just kept watching." Michael decided it was time to tell Emily and Mrs. Margaret everything. When Emily got back from school, he gathered the whole family in the living room. "I need to tell you something," he said seriously. "I think someone's watching us." "Watching us? What do you mean?" asked Emily, alarmed. Michael told her about the car that had followed him and the man who had been watching the house. "Do you think it has something to do with Richard?" asked Mrs. Margaret. "It's possible. Even in prison, he could have sent someone to intimidate us." "But why? The case has already been judged. He was convicted. Maybe it's revenge. Or maybe he thinks we have more evidence against him. The possibility of being in danger left the whole family tense. Emily was particularly worried about the children. "Michael, what if they try to do something to David and Olivia?" "They won't succeed. We'll take all the necessary precautions." "What precautions?" "First, we'll install a security system in the house. Cameras, alarms, everything. Second, we'll alert the school where you work to stay vigilant. Third, I'll hire a security guard to patrol our street." "All this will cost a lot of money," Emily pointed out. "I'd rather spend money than take risks," Mrs. Margaret said firmly. "Michael, do whatever is necessary. Money we can earn back, but family we can't replace." The following week, the house turned into a small fortress. Cameras were installed at every angle. An alarm system was connected directly to the police station, and a security guard named Robert began making discreet rounds in the area. The precautions proved necessary. Robert reported several suspicious attempts to approach, always by the same individuals. A bald man who drove by multiple times a day, a woman who stood at the corner pretending to wait for the bus, and a young man posing as a salesman, but asking specific questions about the family's routine. "They're mapping our routine," Robert told Michael. "They want to know our comings and goings when the house is most vulnerable." "And what do you think they're planning?" "Could be intimidation, could be something worse. I recommend no one goes out alone for now." The situation created a constant tension in the house. The children, even though young, seemed to sense something was different. David especially clung to his parents more and cried whenever they left. "Mommy, come back?" he asked every time Emily went to work. "Of course Mommy will come back, sweetheart. I always come back." "Bad man?" David's question surprised Emily. Even at just 2 years old, he had picked up on the danger surrounding the family. "There's no bad man, my love. Daddy and Mommy will always protect you." But things got worse when Emily started noticing strange activity at the school too. Teachers mentioned a man who had posed as a student's father, asking about Emily's schedule. "Principal," Emily said to her supervisor, "I think I need to explain a situation to you." Emily shared everything: the Richard case, the threats, the surveillance. The principal looked visibly concerned. "Emily, this is very serious. I'll take immediate steps to tighten school security. I don't want to cause trouble for the school." "You're not causing trouble. You're a valuable employee, and we'll protect you. Besides, if criminals are targeting our school, it affects all the students." The principal implemented strict protocols. No strangers could enter without full identification. Emily would always be escorted to the gate. After work, and an additional security guard was hired specifically to watch for suspicious activity. Meanwhile, at home, Mrs. Margaret was devising her own protective strategies. "Jessica," she told the nanny, "I need to teach you some important things." "What, Mrs. Margaret?" "If someone tries to force their way in, you take the children and go to the back bedroom. There's a special lock Michael installed. And there's a direct line to the police. Do you think this could happen?" "I hope not, but it's better to be prepared." Mrs. Margaret had also set up a communication system with the neighbors. 2 houses down lived families who knew the whole story and offered to help in case of an emergency. "If you see anything strange," she told the neighbors, "don't hesitate to call the police and let us know." The protective network that formed around the family was impressive, but it also revealed just how serious the danger they were facing was. The situation reached its limit one Thursday afternoon when Michael was making a delivery in Pittsburgh. Jessica called him in total panic. "Michael, there are 3 men trying to get into the backyard. Where are the children?" "With me, in the back room." I locked the door. "And Mrs. Margaret?" "She's here too. She helped me bring the children." "Did you call the police yet?" "I did. They're coming." Michael floored the accelerator, driving like he'd never driven before. The distance between Pittsburgh and Greenfield had never felt so long. Meanwhile, in the back room, Mrs. Margaret took control of the situation with surprising calm. "Jessica, hold little David. I'll take Olivia." "Mrs. Margaret, I'm so scared." "I know, dear. But let's stay calm. For the children." Outside, they could hear noises of people trying to force windows and doors. The men clearly weren't worried about being discreet. "Scared, Grandma," said little David, sensing the tension. "No, sweetheart. Grandma isn't scared. Grandma is here to protect you." The sound of police sirens came like heavenly music. Within minutes, the noises stopped, indicating the intruders had fled. "Mrs. Margaret, Jessica!" shouted a familiar voice outside. It was Robert, the security guard. "We're here," Jessica called back. "You can come out." "The police caught 2 of the men. The 3rd got away, but we'll get him." When they stepped out of the room, they found the house ransacked. The intruders had broken windows, overturned furniture, clearly searching for something. "What did they want?" asked Jessica. "Probably documents," said Mrs. Margaret. "They must think we still have evidence against Richard." Michael arrived home 20 minutes later, finding the police still processing the scene. When he saw his family gathered in the living room, he hugged them all with desperate strength. "Are you okay? Is anyone hurt?" "We're all fine," said Mrs. Margaret, but it was close. "Did they catch anyone?" 2 men, the officer informed them, "and they're already talking." They confirmed they were hired by associates of Richard Wilson to intimidate you and search for documents that could incriminate them. "What documents?" "We already turned everything over to the authorities." "They didn't know that. They thought you'd kept some evidence to use as leverage later." The confirmation that the attack was related to the Richard case left the family in a difficult position. Even with 2 men arrested, other members of the organization were still out there. "Officer," said Michael, "what's our situation now?" "I'll be honest with you. As long as Richard is in prison, he can keep ordering attacks. And as long as his associates believe you have dangerous information, you'll remain targets. What can we do?" "You have 2 options. First, enter the witness protection program, change your identities, move to another city, start a new life. And the second option? Stay here, but with permanent police protection until we completely dismantle Richard's network." Neither option was appealing. Changing identities meant abandoning everything they'd built in Greenfield. Having permanent police protection meant living like prisoners in their own home. "Can we have some time to decide?" asked Emily. "Of course. But in the meantime, let's tighten security here. Round-the-clock protection." That night, with police patrolling constantly around the house, the family gathered for a difficult conversation. "What do you think we should do?" asked Michael. "I don't want to leave Greenfield," Emily said immediately. "This is our home, our life." "Neither do I," agreed Margaret. I was forced out of my home once before. I won't let it happen again. But we have to think of the children, said Michael. Their safety comes first. The children will be safe here with police protection, Margaret argued. And they'll grow up knowing we didn't run from the fight. Grandma's right, said Emily. If we leave now, these criminals will think they've intimidated us, and they might do the same to others. Jessica, who had stayed quiet during the discussion, asked to speak. Can I share my thoughts? Of course, Jessica. You're the bravest people I know. You faced something terrible and still made sure justice was served. If you run now, you'd be betraying everything you stand for. But it's dangerous, said Michael. Life is dangerous, but you've already proven you can face any danger when you stand together. Jessica's words deeply moved everyone. The young nanny had perfectly captured what they all felt. So, we've decided, said Margaret. We stay, we face this together. With police protection, Michael added, every precaution necessary, but we stay. The decision brought relief, but also a greater sense of responsibility. They'd have to be even more careful, even more united. In the following days, the police investigation moved quickly. The two men arrested during the break-in provided valuable information about the criminal network surrounding Richard, even while he was in prison. We've learned Richard was using other inmates to pass messages outside, the detective explained to Michael. He set up a scheme to intimidate not just you, but other witnesses in the case. Other people were being threatened. Yes, Professor Charles, who helped with little David's book, received anonymous threats. So did Emily's school principal. They wanted to silence everyone involved. And now Richard will face additional charges: criminal conspiracy, threats, witness intimidation. His sentence will be much longer. What about his accomplices? We're arresting them one by one. In 2 weeks, the entire network will be dismantled. The news brought hope, but Michael knew they still had difficult days ahead until all the criminals were caught. During that time, the Greenfield community rallied in an incredible way to protect the family. Neighbors took turns on volunteer patrols. Local shopkeepers watched for anything suspicious. The school set up a special plan to keep Emily safe. I've never seen a town come together like this, the detective remarked. You've truly touched people's hearts. Their story represents the best of humanity, said the mayor, who had visited the family to show support. The courage to do what's right, even when it's hard. A week later, police arrested the last member of the criminal network. Richard was transferred to a maximum security prison, isolated with no way to communicate outside. It's over. The detective told the family officially, "You're safe now." The relief was indescribable. After weeks of constant tension, they could finally breathe in peace. "I can't believe it's over," said Emily, hugging Michael. "It is over. Now we can go back to our normal lives." "Normal?" repeated Mrs. Margaret, smiling. "What's normal for a family like ours?" Mrs. Margaret's question made everyone laugh. Truthfully, their lives had never been exactly normal since that rainy afternoon on the road. With the threat gone, the family could resume their activities without the constant pressure of fear. Michael went back to work as usual, Emily returned to her projects at school, and Mrs. Margaret could once again welcome the young people who sought her advice. But the experience had changed all of them. They had discovered an inner strength they never knew they possessed. "You know," Michael said one night as they put the children to bed, "I think we're stronger than we realized." "How so?" "We faced abandonment, crime, threats, a home invasion, and we managed to overcome all of it without losing who we are. Who we are, the love we have for each other, the desire to do good, the courage to fight for what's right." Emily reflected on her husband's words. It was true. Despite all the hardships, they had managed to keep their family united and their values intact. "And the kids," she said, "they'll grow up knowing they can face anything because they have a family that supports them. Just like we learned we can face anything because we have each other." 2 months after the threats ended, the family received an unexpected visitor. It was a social worker from the state government. "My name is Dr. Rachel," the woman said. "I'm here because we learned about your story through the newspapers and the court case. How can we help you?" Michael asked. "Actually, we're the ones who want to help you. The state government is implementing a support program for families who've stood out for exemplary acts of citizenship. What kind of support? Scholarships for the children, all the way through college, funding for home improvements, and a monthly stipend for community activities. The proposal surprised the whole family. They had never expected official recognition for their actions. "We didn't do anything to be rewarded," Mrs. Margaret said. "We did it because it was the right thing to do." "That's exactly why you deserve support," Dr. Rachel replied. "People like you are rare, and the government wants to encourage other families to follow your example. But is there anything expected in return?" "Just one thing. We'd like you to participate in a speaking program in other cities, sharing your story and inspiring others." Michael and Emily exchanged glances. The idea of traveling to tell their story seemed strange but also important. Would we have to travel a lot? No, just one talk a month, always in nearby cities, and all expenses would be covered. What about the kids? They can come along or stay with someone you trust. The schedule would always be adjusted to your needs. Mrs. Margaret was the first to speak up. "I think we should accept." "Why, Grandma?" "Because our story could help others. It could inspire young people like little David. It could teach other families that it's worth fighting for what's right." "You're right," Emily agreed. "If our experience can do some good, we have an obligation to share it." "Then we'll accept," Michael said, "but on one condition." "What?" "Mrs. Margaret has to come with us to the talks. Her story is just as important as ours. Michael, I'm in a wheelchair. I'm 76 years old. And you've got more wisdom and courage than people half your age. People need to hear your voice too." The idea of including Mrs. Margaret in the talks excited Dr. Rachel. That would be perfect, a multi-generational story showing how solidarity can bring people of different ages together. "Then it's decided," said Mrs. Margaret. "We'll share our story with others." The first talk was scheduled for a month later in the city of Harrisburg. It was an event for families and educators, organized by the local government. "I'm nervous," admitted Emily the night before the trip. "Me too," said Michael. "I've never spoken to such a large audience." "You'll do just fine," encouraged Mrs. Margaret. "Speak from the heart, and people will feel your sincerity." On the day of the talk, the auditorium was packed. Over 300 people had come to hear the story of the family that had faced so many hardships and triumphed through love and unity. "Good afternoon," began Michael, visibly nervous. "My name is Michael, and this is my family." He introduced Emily, Mrs. Margaret, and even David and Olivia, who had come along and were being cared for by Jessica backstage. "Our story began on a rainy afternoon, on a road between Pittsburgh and Greenfield," Michael continued. "I was just a lonely truck driver, heading home after a day's work." He told of meeting Mrs. Margaret, the abandonment she had suffered, and his decision to help her. "When I stopped to help Mrs. Margaret, I thought I was doing her a favor. I had no idea she was saving my life too." The audience listened in silence, clearly moved by the story. When it was Emily's turn to speak, she shared her surprise at discovering she had a grandmother, the emotional reunion, and the revelations that followed. "Finding out I had a family was the greatest gift I'd ever received," she said. "But learning that this family had endured terrible injustices also became a call to action." She explained the investigation they undertook, the evidence they uncovered, and the courage it took to confront dangerous criminals. Finally, Mrs. Margaret spoke. Even in her wheelchair, her presence commanded the room's full attention. "My dear friends," she said in a firm, clear voice, "I'm here today to say something very simple. It's never too late to start over. When I was abandoned on that road, I was 74 years old. I was sick, penniless, and hopeless. Many people in my situation would have simply given up. But life taught me that as long as there are good people in the world, there is always hope. Michael could have driven right past me. Emily could have shut the door when we showed up at her house, but they chose to open their hearts." The emotion in Mrs. Margaret's voice spread through the crowd. Many had tears in their eyes. "And do you know what I discovered? That when we open our hearts to help someone, we are helped too. When we choose to do good, good comes back to us. So my plea to all of you is this: Don't be afraid to be kind. Don't be afraid to step in when you see someone in need. Don't be afraid to fight for what's right. Because sometimes a rainy afternoon can change everything. Sometimes a simple gesture can save a life. Sometimes doing the right thing can create a family. The silence that followed Mrs. Margaret's words was broken by an emotional standing ovation. Many rose to their feet, applauding with tears in their eyes. "Thank you," said one woman from the audience, approaching them. Afterward, "You've inspired me not to give up on my own struggles. Keep fighting," Mrs. Margaret replied. "And remember, you're never alone as long as there are good people in the world." Comments like these continued all afternoon. People came forward to thank them, share their own stories, and ask for advice. "I think we did the right thing by taking on this project," Emily said on the way home. "Absolutely," Michael agreed. "Our story can really make a difference in people's lives. And it felt good to talk about all this," said Mrs. Margaret. "It's like we're honoring little David's memory in a new way." In the following months, the talks became a regular and enjoyable activity for the family. They visited over 12 cities, always receiving warm welcomes and emotional feedback from the audience. Each talk brought new perspectives and new friendships. They met other families who had gone through similar situations, other stories of overcoming adversity through solidarity, other tales of courage and love. "It's amazing how much kindness there is in the world," Emily commented after a particularly moving talk in Rochester. "And how many people are willing to make a difference," Michael added. "The problem is that sometimes people don't know where to start," Mrs. Margaret said. "They think they have to do something grand to help. When in reality, small acts are enough," Michael finished. "Like stopping to help an elderly woman on the road." During this time, the children were also growing and developing remarkably. David, now 3, was already showing a strong and inquisitive personality, always asking questions about everything around him. "Daddy, why does Grandma use a wheelchair?" he asked one day. "Because her legs don't work well, son." "Why?" "Because she got sick. But that doesn't stop her from being happy or taking care of us." "Does she get sad?" "Sometimes, but when she does, we make her smile." "How?" "By giving her lots of love, just like she gives us." David absorbed these conversations with a seriousness that was surprising for his age. It was clear he understood, even in a simple way, that his family was special and that there were important stories behind their existence. Olivia, meanwhile, was proving to be an extremely expressive and affectionate child. Even at just a year and a half, she already showed a special connection with Mrs. Margaret, always smiling when she saw her great-grandmother and reaching out her little arms to be held. "This girl is going to be special," Mrs. Margaret would say whenever she held Olivia. "There's a light in her eyes that reminds me of someone." "Who?" Emily asked. "Little David. The same intelligence, the same sensitivity." The comparison moved everyone in the family. It was as if little David was somehow present through the new generations. A year after the talks began, the family received a special invitation. Columbia University wanted them to participate in a symposium on family and citizenship in the 21st century. "It's a tremendous honor," the professor who extended the invitation by phone said. "You've become a case study in several disciplines: family psychology, sociology, social work." "A case study?" Emily asked, surprised. "Yes, the way you built a family from a crisis and how you faced adversity while maintaining unity and values. It's being studied in several universities. We had no idea our story held such academic importance." "It does, and we'd love for you to share your experience with our students." The symposium was held in a Columbia auditorium, attended by professors, undergraduate and graduate students, and researchers from various fields. "Today we'll hear from a family that exemplifies humanity's best ability to turn adversity into opportunity," the coordinating professor said in his opening remarks. The talk at Columbia was different from the others. The audience was more academic, the questions more technical, but the emotional impact was just as strong. "A question for Mrs. Margaret," a psychology student said. "How did you manage to hold on to hope in what seemed like a hopeless situation?" "My son," she replied, Hope isn't something we keep, it's something we choose to have every single day. Can you explain that better? When you wake up in the morning, you can choose to see the problems or choose to see the possibilities. I chose to see the possibilities, even when they seemed very small. And what kept you making that choice? The certainty that God doesn't abandon people who do good, and that there are always people willing to help, as Michael and Emily proved. Mrs. Margaret's answer sparked a fascinating discussion about psychological resilience, social support systems, and the importance of spirituality in overcoming trauma. Another student asked Michael about the moment he decided to help. Mr. Michael, psychologically speaking, what led you to make a decision that involved personal risks to help a stranger? Honestly, it wasn't a rational decision, Michael answered. It was instinctive. I saw someone in need, and I just couldn't walk past. But there were risks. It could have been a scam, a trap. It could have, but I'd rather risk being fooled than risk letting someone freeze to death on the side of the road. And now, looking back, how do you evaluate that decision? It was the best decision of my life. Not just because I found a family, but because I discovered who I really am. How so? I learned that I'm someone capable of love, of fighting, of being brave when needed. Before, I thought I was just an ordinary truck driver. Now I know I'm so much more. Michael's reflection deeply moved the academic audience. Several professors later remarked that they'd rarely heard such a profound analysis of self-awareness and personal growth. For Emily, the questions focused on building family bonds under unconventional circumstances. Professor Emily said, as a social work student, what was it like to accept a grandmother who suddenly appeared in your life? It was a gradual process, Emily replied. At first, there was more compassion than family love. But as we learned her story, understood her pain and her strengths, the love grew naturally. And there was no resistance, no doubts about the truth of her story. There were at first, but the evidence was clear, and beyond that, there was an emotional connection that went beyond paperwork. What kind of connection? It's hard to explain, but when she told stories about my mother, I felt like I was discovering parts of my own identity I never knew existed. And how was it integrating this new family identity into your established life? It was challenging, but also enriching. I learned about family history, about values passed down through generations, about a way of seeing the world that my mother couldn't share with me because of our separation. Their participation in the academic symposium marked a new phase in recognizing the importance of their family's story. Several researchers expressed interest in deeper studies, and proposals for documentaries and books began to emerge. We're becoming celebrities, Michael joked with Emily one evening. It's strange, isn't it? I never imagined our personal lives would interest so many people. It's because our story touches on universal things, observed Mrs. Margaret, who was listening. Everyone has felt abandoned at some point. Everyone has needed help. Everyone has had to choose between doing what's right and what's easy. You're right, Grandma. Our story is specific, but the feelings are universal. Exactly, that's why people relate. They see possibilities for their own lives in us. 2 years after the first lectures, the family had become a national reference on topics of family solidarity and active citizenship. But for them, what mattered most remained their daily life in Greenfield, the mutual care and the children's growth. David, now 5 years old, was attending preschool and already showed a strong personality. He was inquisitive, empathetic, and displayed clear signs of having inherited the sense of justice that characterized the family. "Teacher," he said one day at school, "why doesn't Johnny have a snack like the other kids?" "What do you mean, David?" "He always watches when we eat, but he never brings a snack." David's observation led the teacher to investigate the situation. It turned out that Johnny came from a very poor family and often had nothing to eat for snack time. "And what do you think we can do to help Johnny?" the teacher asked. "I can share my snack with him." "That's a very kind idea. But what if we talk to the other classmates to see if they'd like to help too?" David's initiative sparked a movement among the entire class. The children began bringing extra snacks to share with those in need, and the parents got involved. organizing a more structured support system. "I'm proud of David," Emily said to Michael when she heard the story. "He's learning the right values." "He's following the family's example," Michael replied, "and little David's too, in a way." "How so?" "Little David started fighting for justice very young as well. I think David is walking the same path." The comparison to little David became more evident when David started asking questions about the family's history. "Daddy, who's the David that has the same name as me?" "He's your great-uncle's son, a very brave boy who tried to protect your great-grandmother." "Where is he now?" He isn't with us anymore, my boy, but his memory is always alive in our family." "Why isn't he here anymore?" Michael hesitated, unsure how to explain the situation to a 5-year-old. "He tried to do the right thing, and some bad people didn't like that. An accident ended up happening." "Was he a hero?" "Yes, he was. A real hero." "Can I be a hero too?" "You already are, David. Every day you help a friend, every day you're kind to your sister, every day you listen to mommy and daddy. You're being a hero." Conversations about heroism and values became frequent in the household. Margaret, especially, loved telling the children stories about the importance of doing good. "Grandma," David asked one day, "why are some people bad?" "Oh, my boy, that's a hard question," Margaret replied. "Sometimes people do bad things because their hearts are hurting, sometimes because no one taught them how to be good, and sometimes because they've forgotten how nice it feels to do good. What do we do with bad people? We try to help them be better, but if they don't want to change, we protect ourselves and the people we love." "Like you did with the uncle who was bad?" "Exactly. We tried talking, we tried solving things peacefully, but when he kept being bad, we had to call the police to protect us." "And did he learn to be good now?" "We don't know, sweetheart. We hope so. But what matters is that he can't hurt anyone anymore." These conversations showed how David was processing the family's history with a maturity beyond his years. It was clear he understood concepts of good and evil, justice and injustice, more deeply than other children his age. Olivia, now 3, didn't engage much in these philosophical discussions yet, but she absorbed the loving and secure atmosphere that defined their home. She was a cheerful, affectionate child, especially close to Mrs. Margaret. "Grandma, are you old?" she asked one day with the typical sincerity of children. "Yes, my doll, very old. But will you stay with me forever?" "I'll stay as long as I can, my love. And even when I can't stay anymore, I'll keep watching over you from heaven." From heaven. It's a beautiful place where good people go when they get very old, and from there they keep sending love to the people they left on earth. The conversation about mortality was difficult but necessary. Mrs. Margaret was 79, and though she was relatively healthy, she was realistic about the limitations of age. "Michael," she said in a private talk, "we need to discuss some practical things." "What things, Mrs. Margaret?" "About what will happen when I'm no longer here." "Mrs. Margaret, you don't need to talk about this now." "Yes, I do. I can't leave without making sure everything is in order for you all. You won't be leaving anytime soon." "I hope not, but I want to be prepared." Mrs. Margaret had, in fact, meticulously organized all the legal and financial aspects of her life. Her will, power of attorney, instructions for her final wishes, everything was documented and explained. "The money left from the sale of the house and my retirement, I want it used for the children's education," she said, "and to keep the David Wilson Taylor Scholarship running. Mrs. Margaret, and one more thing, I want you to promise me you'll keep telling our story. To the children, to others, to anyone who will listen. We promise. And I want you to teach David and Olivia to be proud of the family they come from, to understand they were born from a story of love and courage. We'll teach them. And most of all, I want you all to always be happy, to cherish every day together, not letting small problems ruin the big joy." The conversation left Michael emotional, but it also brought him peace. Mrs. Margaret was taking care of everything with the same determination she'd faced every other hard situation in her life. Thankfully, Mrs. Margaret's preparations proved premature. She remained strong and active for 2 more years, watching the children grow and taking part in all the family's activities. David, now 7, was in first grade at Lincoln Elementary School and excelled both academically and socially. He was still an empathetic and inquisitive child, always ready to help classmates and stand up for what was right. Olivia, 5, was in preschool and showed signs of being just as bright and sensitive. She'd developed a special passion for drawing and painting, often depicting the family in her artwork. "Look, Grandma," she said one day, showing a drawing. "This is our family. How beautiful, my doll. Tell me who's who." "This is Daddy," Olivia said, pointing to a tall figure. "This is Mommy. This is me, this is David, and this is you in your special chair." "And who's this?" Mrs. Margaret asked, pointing to a smaller figure beside the family. "That's cousin little David, who's in heaven but watches over us." Olivia's answer surprised and moved Mrs. Margaret. Even at such a young age, the little girl had internalized little David's presence in the family's story. "How do you know about cousin little David, my love?" Big David told me. "He said he's our guardian angel." The way the children were processing and integrating the family's history showed that its values were being passed down naturally and healthily. When David turned 8, the family threw a special party, not just to celebrate his birthday, but to honor all the important milestones they'd shared together. "David," said Michael during the party, "do you know why your birthday is special for the whole family?" "Why, Dad?" "Because you represent a new generation of our family, a generation that will grow up knowing what true love is, a united family, and the courage to do what's right." "And what do I have to do?" "Just keep being yourself. Keep being kind, brave, and always willing to help those in need. Like Cousin David used to do, exactly like Cousin David used to do." The party became a moment of reflection for all the adults present. Michael, Emily, and Mrs. Margaret looked at David and Olivia playing with their friends and could see the future of the family unfolding positively. "We did it," Mrs. Margaret murmured to Emily. "We did it. We built a real family." "We really did, Grandma. And the kids will carry forward everything they've learned. They'll be better adults than we were. They'll be adults ready to make a difference in the world." 6 months after David's party, Mrs. Margaret began showing signs that her health was declining. Nothing dramatic, just the natural fatigue of an 81-year-old who had lived a full and intense life. "I'm tired," she told Michael one morning. "More tired than usual. Do you want me to call the doctor?" "It's not that kind of tired. It's a good tired. The kind you feel when you've fulfilled your mission." "What mission?" "To see you all happy. To see the children growing up well. To know our family will continue after I'm gone." Mrs. Margaret's words carried a tone of farewell that worried Michael. "Mrs. Margaret, are you okay?" "I'm wonderful. Better than I ever imagined I could be. But I'm also at peace when the time comes." "Don't talk like that. Michael, I'm 81. I've had a stroke, lived through terrible things, but I was lucky enough to find you all. I've lived more than I deserved. You deserved all of it and more. Deserved or not, what matters is that it happened, and it was beautiful." In the following months, Mrs. Margaret continued to be part of the family's life, but with less energy. She spent more time resting, but remained attentive to everything around her. "Grandma," Olivia asked one day, "are you sick?" "No, sweetheart, I'm just a little more tired. Will you get better? I'll always be here watching over you one way or another." The children seemed to sense intuitively that something was changing and became even more affectionate with their great-grandmother. David always made sure to tell her about his day at school, and Olivia brought her drawings to cheer her up. One autumn afternoon, while the whole family was gathered in the living room, Mrs. Margaret asked to speak to everyone. "My dears," she said calmly, "I want you to know something very important." "What, Grandma?" Emily asked. "That these have been the happiest years of my life. All of them, from that rainy afternoon until today." "Grandma, let me finish. I want you to know I have no regrets, no sadness, no bitterness, only gratitude." "Gratitude for what?" "For finding you all, for knowing my great-grandchildren, for seeing our family grow and strengthen, for being part of such a beautiful story." Tears welled in Michael and Emily's eyes. "And I want you to promise me one thing. Anything. Mrs. Margaret. That you'll keep being happy after I'm gone. That you'll remember me with joy, not sadness. And that you'll teach David and Olivia that their grandma left happy and at peace. You're not leaving, said David, who had understood the conversation. Yes, I am, my boy, but not really. I'll always be in your hearts. Like Cousin David. Exactly like Cousin David. 2 weeks after that conversation on a quiet Sunday morning, Mrs. Margaret did not wake up. She had passed away in her sleep without pain, without suffering, just letting life slip away gently. Michael found her in bed with a serene expression, even smiling. In her hands, she held a photo of the whole family together, taken at David's last birthday. Mrs. Margaret's funeral was an event that mobilized the entire town of Greenfield. The church was packed not only with family and friends, but with hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by the family's story. We are here today, the priest said during the Mass, to celebrate the life of an extraordinary woman. Margaret Wilson wasn't just someone who overcame adversity. She was someone who turned adversity into opportunities to do good. The priest briefly recounted the family's story, highlighting how Mrs. Margaret had managed at 74 years old to completely restart her life and build something beautiful. She taught us that it's never too late to find love, to build a family, to make a difference in the world. She taught us that kindness is always rewarded, even if it sometimes takes time. During the ceremony, several people stood to pay tribute. The mayor spoke about the impact Mrs. Margaret had on the city's elderly protection policies. The principal of the school where Emily worked talked about how the David Wilson Taylor Scholarship had changed the lives of many young people. But the most moving testimony came from a 17-year-old girl named Emma, who had been one of the scholarship recipients. Mrs. Margaret, she said, tears in her eyes, taught me that it doesn't matter where we come from, but where we're going, that we can choose to be better, even when everything seems hard. She always said that David, the boy the scholarship was named after, had been courageous to do what was right, and that we all had to be courageous too, each in our own way. Because of the scholarship, I was able to finish high school, and now I'm going to study law. I want to be a lawyer to defend people like Mrs. Margaret, who are sometimes mistreated by their own families. Emma's testimony perfectly captured the legacy Mrs. Margaret was leaving behind, a network of people inspired to do good and fight for justice. At the cemetery during the burial, Michael made sure to speak on behalf of the family. Mrs. Margaret, he said, speaking directly to the casket, thank you for saving my life on that road. Thank you for teaching me what true family is. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a better father, husband, and human being. We promise we'll take good care of Emily and the children, just like you always did. We promise we'll keep telling our story, so others can be inspired. And we promise we'll never forget the values you taught us. Emily also wanted to speak. Grandma, she said, thank you for giving me the chance to know my mother through your stories. Thank you for teaching me that family isn't just about blood, but about choice and love. And thank you for being the best grandmother I could have had, even if it was only for a short time. Even little David wanted to say goodbye. Bye, Grandma, he said, tossing a flower onto the casket. Now you'll be in heaven with Cousin David, watching over us from there. The simplicity and faith of the child moved everyone present. In the days following the funeral, the house felt strangely silent. Mrs. Margaret's absence was palpable in every room, in every object she had touched, in every corner where she used to sit. It's strange, Emily said to Michael. The house feels empty, even with all of us here. It's because she was the heart of the home, Michael replied. Her presence gave life to everything. What do we do now? We keep going. The way she wanted us to. We'll be happy, we'll take care of the children, and we'll honor her memory. The adjustment was hard for everyone, but especially for the children. David, who was 8 years old, understood that his great-grandmother had passed away, but he still asked when she would come back. Olivia, at 5, took several weeks to accept that Mrs. Margaret wasn't just traveling. Mummy, Olivia asked one night, when is Grandma coming back from heaven? She's not coming back, sweetheart. When people go to heaven, they stay there forever. But she said she'd take care of us from there. And she is. Don't you feel it? Olivia thought for a moment. I do. Sometimes I feel like she's here but invisible." The little girl's perception brought comfort not just to her but to the whole family. There really were moments when Mrs. Margaret's presence felt almost tangible, especially when they gathered in the living room where she used to sit. 3 months after Mrs. Margaret's passing, the family received an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed young man around 20 years old rang the doorbell on a Saturday afternoon. "Good afternoon," he said when Michael opened the door. "My name is Gabriel Wilson. I'm David Wilson Taylor's cousin." The revelation left Michael momentarily speechless. Another relative of little David? Someone they didn't know? "Please come in," Michael said, regaining his composure. "Emily, come here." Gabriel stepped into the living room, clearly nervous. When he saw the photos of Mrs. Margaret around the house, his eyes filled with tears. "So it was true," he murmured. "Aunt Margaret really was alive." "What do you mean?" asked Emily, who had just entered the room. "I'm the son of another nephew of Mrs. Margaret's, a nephew from her husband Edward's side. Our fathers were brothers. But how did you know she was here?" "Through the lawsuit against my uncle Richard. When I found out he'd been arrested for stealing from Mrs. Margaret, I was devastated. I thought she had passed away from the mistreatment." Gabriel explained that his family had lost touch with Mrs. Margaret many years ago, and that they had always wondered what happened to her. "When I heard about the lawsuit, I started investigating. I found out you existed, that she had found a new family. I was happy but also full of regret." "Regret for what?" "For not looking for her sooner, for not knowing she was going through such hardship." "You couldn't have known," Michael said. "And even if you had, what could you have done?" "I could have offered her a home. My family is financially comfortable." "Gabriel," Emily said, "can I ask you something? Why did you only show up now after she passed?" The question was direct but necessary. Gabriel might have been interested in inheritance or some material benefit. "Because I only found out she had passed away last week," he answered with clear sincerity. "I was planning my trip to meet her when I got the news." "How did you find out?" "Through the obituary in the newspaper. When I saw her full name and age, I knew it was her." Gabriel pulled some documents from his bag. "I brought old photos, certificates, things that can prove our family connection. I don't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to meet the family, who took such good care of her." The photos Gabriel showed were indeed of Mrs. Margaret in her younger years, alongside people who were clearly family. One photo showed her with a man Gabriel identified as his grandfather Edward. "This was taken at my parents' wedding," Gabriel explained. "Mrs. Margaret was the godmother." The evidence was convincing, and more importantly, Gabriel showed genuine emotion when speaking about Mrs. Margaret. "Gabriel," Michael said, "would you like some coffee and to talk more? We have a lot of stories to share." For the rest of the afternoon, Gabriel and the family exchanged memories and stories about Mrs. Margaret. Gabriel shared stories from her youth that even Emily didn't know, and he was fascinated to hear about his aunt's final years. "Was she truly happy with you?" he asked. "Very happy," Emily replied. "Her last years were the best of her life." "That's a relief to hear. Our family always wondered what had happened to her." "And why did you never look for her?" "We tried at first, but after the stroke, Richard said she didn't want contact with anyone in the family anymore, that she was very ill and preferred to be isolated." "Another one of Richard's lies," said Michael. "Exactly. Had we known the truth, we would have stepped in much sooner." Gabriel became a frequent presence in the house. He wasn't trying to replace Mrs. Margaret or take on any family role. He simply wanted to stay connected to her memory. "Can I make a proposal?" he said during one visit. "Of course. I'd like to contribute financially to the David Wilson Taylor Scholarship. My family has a successful business, and we could significantly expand the number of recipients." The proposal excited Michael and Emily. With more resources, they could help many more underprivileged youth. "But there's one condition," Gabriel added. "What is it?" "I want you to keep full control of the project. My family will only provide financial support. Decisions about criteria, selection, follow-up, all of that stays with you." "Why?" "Because you knew Mrs. Margaret better than anyone. You understand exactly what her vision was for helping young people. We just want to honor her memory." The partnership with Gabriel proved extremely positive. In the first year, they tripled the number of scholarships offered. Young people from across the region began benefiting from the program, which became a benchmark for education and citizenship. Mrs. Margaret would be proud, Emily said to Michael, seeing the project's success. She would, and so would little David. 2 years after Gabriel joined the family, David was 10 and Olivia was 7. Both had adjusted well to the presence of their new uncle, and especially loved the stories he told about Mrs. Margaret in her youth. Uncle Gabriel, David asked one day, was Grandma stubborn even when she was young? Oh yes, Gabriel laughed. My father always said that once Margaret made up her mind, nothing in the world could change it. Just like David, Olivia said, referring to her brother. Hey, David protested, I'm not stubborn, I'm determined. Same thing, Olivia shot back. The siblings' banter made everyone laugh, and Gabriel remarked, that's exactly how Mrs. Margaret and my grandfather Edward used to talk, always teasing each other. Tell us more stories about her, Uncle Gabriel, Olivia begged. Let me think of a good one. Oh, I know the story of when she saved a cat that fell into a well. The children settled in to listen as Gabriel began recounting one of the many tales he'd heard about Mrs. Margaret's courage and kindness from a young age. She was about 15 and visiting her aunt's house in the countryside. There was a house cat that had fallen into an old well and couldn't get out. And then, all the adults said it was too dangerous to go down there, that the well could collapse, that the cat would find its way out. But Margaret couldn't bear to hear the cat meowing and do nothing. What did she do? She took a rope, tied it around her waist and climbed down to rescue the cat. By herself? All alone, she managed to grab the cat and climb back up. Everyone was furious with her for risking her life, but also relieved she was safe. And the cat? The cat was fine too. And they say it never left her side for the rest of the visit. The story perfectly captured Mrs. Margaret's personality, always ready to help, even when it meant personal risk. She was always like that, said Emily. She could never see someone suffering without trying to help. That's how it all started between us, Michael recalled. I couldn't just pass her by on the road, and she couldn't resist welcoming you into her life, Gabriel added. Gabriel's presence had brought a new dimension to preserving Margaret's memory. Through him, the children could learn aspects of their great-grandmother they hadn't known, and the family as a whole felt they were honoring her life more fully. 5 years after Margaret's passing, the family had found a new balance. The pain of loss never completely disappeared, but it was softened by happy memories and the feeling that they were fulfilling what she would have wanted. David, now 13 and entering adolescence, already showed clear signs of following the family's legacy of leadership and social engagement. At school, he was known for standing up to bullying and organizing campaigns to help those in need. Dad, he said to Michael one day, I want to do something special for Grandma's anniversary. What do you have in mind? I want to organize a food drive for families in need in her name. That's a beautiful idea, David, but it'll be a lot of work. I know, but I want to do it. Grandma always helped people. Now it's our turn. The campaign David organized was a surprising success. In just 1 week, they collected over 2 tons of food, which were distributed to 50 struggling families in the area. I'm proud of you, Michael told his son on distribution day. I just did what Grandma would have done. Exactly, and that's what we'll always expect from you. Olivia, now 10, had developed her artistic talents and used her art to express her love for the family. Her drawings and paintings often depicted happy family moments, always including Margaret in some way. Look what I made, Dad, she said, showing a new painting. It's beautiful, Olivia. What is it? It's our family, in heaven. When we get there, we'll see Grandma and Cousin David again. The girl's simple spirituality touched everyone in the family deeply. She had created a vision of the future that included heavenly reunions, bringing comfort, especially in moments of longing. Emily, now 42, had become the assistant principal at the school where she worked. Her experience with education and citizenship, shaped by her time with Margaret, had made her a respected educator in the region. Professor Emily, the school principal, said, the Department of Education wants you to lead a pilot project on human values education. What kind of project? based on the methodology you developed here, using real stories of resilience and solidarity to teach citizenship. The offer was tempting, but Emily knew it would involve travel and time away from her family. Can I think about it? Of course. But know this could be a chance to expand your work nationwide. That night, Emily talked to Michael about the proposal. What do you think? I think it'd be an incredible way to honor Margaret's memory, Michael replied, taking her values across the whole country. But what about the kids, our family? The kids are growing up. David is 13, Olivia is 10. They'll understand it's important work. And you? How would you feel about me traveling? Proud. Proud to have a wife who can make a difference in thousands of children's education. Are you sure? I am. Besides, Margaret always said, our story should inspire others. This would be the perfect way to do that. Emily accepted the proposal from the Department of Education, and over the next 2 years, she coordinated the implementation of the Human Values Project in schools across the country. The project used methodologies based on real-life stories of resilience, solidarity, and building family bonds. How did you develop this approach? Asked a school principal during one of the training sessions. Through my own experience, Emily replied. I've lived firsthand how stories of love and courage can transform lives. Can you give a practical example? My family was formed when a truck driver stopped to help an abandoned woman on the roadside. That simple story taught my children more about human values than any textbook ever could. The success of the project led Emily to be nationally recognized as an expert in values education. She received invitations to conferences, lectures, and even international consulting opportunities. They're inviting me to Uruguay, she told Michael one day. For what? To present our methodology at an international education conference. That's amazing, Emily. You deserve all this recognition. But Emily hesitated. I don't know if I should accept international invitations. Our family has always been local, regional. Are we losing our essence? Emily's concern was understandable. They had always valued simplicity, community life, in Greenfield, and their local roots. Let's talk to the kids, Michael suggested. See what they think. At the family meeting, David and Olivia were clear in their opinion. Mum, you have to go, David said. If our story can help children in other countries, you have to share it. But won't you miss me? We will, Olivia admitted. But it's for a good cause. And besides, David added, Grandma always said that when we can, help we should, even when it's hard. The children's wisdom, echoing Margaret's teachings, convinced Emily to accept the international invitation. The lecture in Uruguay became a milestone in Emily's life. She managed to convey to educators from various South American countries the importance of using real stories and emotional connections in the educational process. Professor, an Argentine educator said after the lecture, your story made me cry and inspired me at the same time. How can I apply this methodology in my school? Start by looking for real stories in your own community, Emily replied. Every town has examples of solidarity, resilience, and family bonds. Use those stories as the foundation for teaching values. And if I can't find such stories, then you can start by creating one. Encourage your students to practice kindness, document those experiences, and turn them into teaching material. Emily's return from Uruguay marked a new phase in the family's life. She had discovered she could have a far greater impact than she imagined, but she also reaffirmed that her foundation, her strength, lay in her family and the Greenfield community. How was it? Michael asked when she arrived. Amazing and scary at the same time, Emily replied. Amazing because I saw how our story can truly inspire people anywhere. Scary because I realized the responsibility that comes with... Tell us what responsibility? The responsibility to live up to the story we tell, to keep being an example, not just people who had an interesting experience in the past. Emily's reflection showed her maturity and awareness of the role the family had taken on as a reference for human values. And how do we do that? Michael asked. By continuing to be who we've always been, taking care of each other, helping our community, raising our children to be good people. It's that simple. It's that simple. Great values manifest through simple, everyday actions. Michael, now 50, had also grown professionally. His transportation company had expanded and become one of the most respected in the region. But his success never made him forget his roots or the values he had learned from Mrs. Margaret. "Michael," said the mayor of Greenfield one day, "we have a proposal for you." "What proposal?" "We'd like you to be our Secretary of Social Services. Your experience with family and community issues would be invaluable." The offer of a public position surprised Michael. He had never considered a career in politics or administration. "I need to think about it, Mayor, and talk to my family." "Of course, but know this would be an opportunity to apply everything you've learned about solidarity and family protection on a municipal scale." That evening, Michael discussed the proposal with Emily. "What do you think?" "I think it would be a wonderful way to honor Mrs. Margaret's memory," Emily replied. "She always wanted laws to better protect the elderly and vulnerable families. But I don't know anything about public administration. You understand people. And in the end, public administration is about caring for people." "What about my business? You could hire a manager, or sell it, or keep it as an investment while you focus on public service." The conversation with the children was just as enlightening. "Dad," said David, "if you become secretary, you could help so many more families like ours." "How so?" "Families going through hardships, who need protection, who don't know where to turn for help." "Would you do it?" "I would. I think it's the most important work I could do." Michael accepted the position of Secretary of Social Services, and over the next 3 years, he implemented a series of innovative programs based on his personal experience. The Welcoming Family program supported families willing to take in vulnerable seniors. The Community Watch project created neighborhood networks to identify and prevent cases of neglect and abuse. The Family Emergency Fund provided temporary financial assistance to families in crisis. "Michael," the mayor said after 2 years, "the rates of elder abandonment in our city have dropped to almost zero. That's the result of the whole team's work. But it was your vision that guided everything. Your personal experience gave these programs credibility and effectiveness." Michael's success as a municipal secretary began attracting attention from other cities and even the state government. "Michael," said the Secretary of Social Development during a visit, "we want to replicate your programs statewide. I'd be honored to help. And we have a proposal. How would you like to oversee the statewide implementation? It would be a significant promotion." Once again, Michael faced the possibility of expanding his impact, but also moving away from his local roots. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. But it's a unique opportunity to transform thousands of lives across the state." The family discussion about this new proposal was more complex than the previous ones. "Dad," said Olivia, now 12, "if you accept, will we have to move?" "We'd probably have to go to the capital." "I don't want to leave Greenfield," she said immediately. "This is our home." "Neither do I," agreed David, now 15. "All. Our friends are here, our story is here." Emily also expressed concern. "Michael, don't you think we risk losing our essence if we move too far from our roots?" "How so?" "Our strength has always come from simplicity, from community life, from local ties. If we become state employees living in the capital, will we still be who we are?" The family's concern made Michael reflect deeply on his values and priorities. "You're right," he finally said. "Our mission isn't to be important or famous, it's to make a difference where we are." "So, you're going to refuse?" "I am. And I'll propose an alternative, that the program be implemented statewide, but with decentralized coordination. Each region adapts the programs to their local reality." Michael's proposal was accepted by the state government, and in the following years he coordinated the implementation of programs across New York State without leaving Greenfield. "It was the right decision," Emily said 2 years later. "We multiplied our impact without losing our roots." "And the children kept growing up where they belong," Michael added. David, now 17, was in his senior year at Washington High. Schooling clearly showed he'd pursue a career in public service and social justice. He'd been elected student council president and regularly organized humanitarian aid campaigns. "Dad," he said one day, "I want to study law at Columbia University." "Why law?" "To be a public defender. I want to defend people like Grandma Margaret, who sometimes get mistreated and can't protect themselves. That's a beautiful choice, son, and very fitting for our family. I think it's my way of honoring little David and Grandma's memory." The idea of David pursuing a legal career moved the whole family. It was as if the circle was closing. Little David had fought for justice and lost his life. Now David could continue that fight through the proper legal channels. Olivia, at 15, had decided she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, but specialized in arts education. "Mom," she said, "I want to use art to teach human values, like you do with stories." "How so?" "I want to develop methods using drawing, painting, theater, and music to teach about solidarity, family, and courage." "That's a wonderful idea, Olivia. Art has always been a powerful way to pass on values, and besides, I want to work especially with children who've gone through family trauma. Use art to help them express themselves and heal." Olivia's vision for her future career showed how deeply she'd internalized the lessons of love and care that defined their family. Gabriel, still a constant presence in the family, had also grown. His company had become one of the main sponsors of social projects in the region, always focused on family protection and education. "Michael," he said during a Sunday lunch, "I have a crazy proposal." "What proposal?" "How about we start a foundation, combining your administrative experience, Emily's educational expertise, my funding ability, and the energy of David and Olivia." "A foundation for what?" "To do on a national scale what you already do regionally. Family protection, values-based education, support for underprivileged youth." Gabriel's proposal was tempting but also concerning. Starting a national foundation would mean a level of responsibility and exposure the family had never experienced. "Let me think about one thing," Emily said. "What would the foundation be called?" "The Margaret Wilson Taylor Foundation," Gabriel answered immediately, "in honor of Mrs. Margaret and little David." "And what would the mission be?" "To promote family solidarity and human values education, based on the true story of a family, formed through kindness and strengthened by love." The mission statement deeply touched everyone present. It was exactly what Mrs. Margaret would have approved of. "Let's do it," Michael finally said, "but with one condition." "What?" "The foundation has to start small here in Greenfield. If it works, it can grow gradually. We don't want to become a big organization that loses touch with people's reality." "I completely agree," said Gabriel. "Organic growth, always keeping the essence." The Margaret Wilson Taylor Foundation was officially created 2 years later, when David was starting law school and Olivia was in her sophomore year of high school. The inauguration ceremony was held at the school where Emily worked, attended by local authorities, beneficiaries of the family's social programs, and people who had followed the story from the beginning. "Today," said Michael in his inauguration speech, "we're not just creating a foundation, we're institutionalizing a way of life based on love, solidarity, and the courage to do what's right." This foundation was born on a wet road, when a truck driver decided to stop and help an abandoned elderly woman. It grew in a simple house in Greenfield, where a chosen family discovered that true love overcomes all adversity. And now, through this foundation, we hope this way of living will multiply and inspire other people, other families, other communities. Michael's speech was followed by a presentation by Olivia, who had created an art installation visually, telling the whole family story. "This art," she said, "represents our journey. It began with rain and sadness, but blossomed into love and hope. And now it spreads as seeds that will germinate elsewhere." David also insisted on speaking. "I was 2 years old when my great-grandmother passed away," Chunu, he said, "but I grew up hearing her stories and absorbing her values. Through this foundation, I hope other children can grow up knowing examples of courage and kindness, even if they didn't have great-grandmothers like ours." The foundation started small, initially focusing on 3 areas: protection for vulnerable seniors, human values education, and support for underprivileged youth through scholarships. In its first year of operation, they managed to assist 50 at-risk seniors, implement the Human Values Education program in 12 regional schools, and offer 20 full scholarships. "The numbers are modest," said Gabriel at a board meeting, "but the impact is real." "That's exactly how it should be," replied Emily. "We'd rather serve 50 people well than serve 500 poorly." The foundation's growth was gradual and sustainable. Each year, new programs were added, always based on real needs identified by the team. The Living Memory program documented stories of local seniors, preserving their wisdom and experiences for future generations. The Volunteer Family Project mobilized families willing to temporarily foster at-risk children. The Young Leaders program identified and trained teenagers with potential to become agents of social change. 5 years after the foundation's creation, David graduated with a law degree specializing in human rights and family law. His thesis was on legal protection for seniors, critical analysis of US legislation in light of real cases. "Son," said Michael on graduation day, "Mrs. Margaret would be proud of you." "I hope so, Dad, and I hope to make a difference in the lives of people like her." "You will, I'm sure of it." David placed first in the public defender exam, fulfilling his dream of legally defending vulnerable people. Olivia graduated with a degree in visual arts, specializing in art education, developing innovative methodologies during college to use art in human values education. "Mom," she said on graduation day, "I want to work at the foundation. I want to create an art therapy program for children who've experienced family trauma." "It would be wonderful to have you on the team," replied Emily. "But you sure this is what you want?" "I am. Our family taught me that the greatest fulfillment in life is being able to help others, and I want to use my talent for that." The Art and Life program, created and coordinated by Olivia, had become one of the foundation's most successful initiatives. Through workshops in drawing, painting, theater, and music, children who had suffered abandonment, abuse, or other forms of family violence found ways to express themselves, process their trauma, and rebuild their self-esteem. "Olivia," said one of the children in the program, "before I only knew how to cry. Now I can paint my sadness and turn it into beautiful colors." Comments like these confirmed to Olivia that she had chosen the right path for her life. 10 years after the foundation's creation, the organization had become a national benchmark in family protection and values-based education. It served over 1,000 people a year, had programs implemented in 8 US states, and received visits from scholars around the world eager to learn its methodologies. "Michael," said the Secretary of Social Development during an official visit, "the Margaret Wilson Taylor Foundation has become a model for how social organizations can be efficient and transformative." "Thank you, Mr. Secretary, but the secret isn't ours. It's in the values we learned from Mrs. Margaret." "What values, specifically?" "Simplicity, transparency, a focus on people, gradual growth, and above all, never forgetting where we came from." "And where did you come from?" "From a wet road, from a simple act of kindness, from a family formed through love and strengthened through hardship." The Secretary's visit led to an invitation for the Foundation to take on the national coordination of a federal family protection program. "It's a huge responsibility," Emily said at a board meeting. "Huge, but necessary," Gabriel replied. "If we refuse, the program might go to an organization without our experience and commitment. And if we accept and can't handle it, then we'll learn, adapt, and improve, like we always have." David, now 25, and an experienced public defender, was firm. "We have to accept. It's our responsibility to all the vulnerable families in this country. And besides," added Olivia, at 23, "it's what Grandma and Cousin David would have wanted us to do, to help as many people as possible." The decision to accept national coordination marked a new chapter in the Foundation's and the family's history. What had begun as a local story of resilience had turned them into national agents of social change. "Sometimes I stop and think," Michael said to Emily one evening, "and I can't believe what's happened to our family." "What do you mean?" "We started as 3 lost and broken people. Me alone on the road, you without a family, Mrs. Margaret abandoned and sick. And we became a family that impacts thousands of lives across the country. It wasn't us who became that, Emily replied. It was the love that brought us together that became that. You're right. The love that started when you stopped to help Mrs. Margaret, and grew when you took me in, and when she taught us that family is a choice, not just blood. 15 years after that rainy afternoon on the road between Pittsburgh and Greenfield, the family's story had become a cultural phenomenon in the US. Books were written, documentaries were made, and academic theses explored different aspects of Michael, Emily, Mrs. Margaret, and the children's journey. But for the family themselves, the most important thing wasn't public recognition. It was the certainty that they had honored the memory of Mrs. Margaret and little David, and that they had managed to turn pain into love, trauma into growth, adversity into opportunity. "Michael," said David during a family gathering, "I have some news." "What news?" "My girlfriend is pregnant. You're going to be grandparents." The news of a new generation joining the family moved everyone deeply. It would be the first child in the family to be born knowing the entire story that came before them from the very beginning. "What will you name the baby?" asked Olivia. "If it's a girl, we want to name her Margaret," said David, "in honor of her great-grandmother." "And if it's a boy?" "Edward, in honor of the great-grandfather we never knew but who we know was a good man." The choice of names showed how the family continued to honor their history and ancestors. Olivia had also found love. She was dating a music teacher who shared her passion for using art in education. "We also plan to have children," she said. "We want a big family, full of love and music." The prospect of seeing the family grow and multiply brought a sense of fulfillment that Michael and Emily had never imagined they would experience. "Mrs. Margaret would be happy," said Emily, "seeing that the family she started will keep growing, and that the values she taught us will be passed on to another generation." In the final chapter of this story, 20 years after the encounter on the road, Michael was celebrating his 60th birthday, surrounded by a family that had grown far beyond what anyone could have imagined. David, now married and a father of 2, had become one of the most respected public defenders in the state. Olivia, also married and a mother of 1, coordinated a national arts education program. Emily had retired from the school, but remained active in the foundation. Gabriel stayed on as the primary funder and strategic advisor of the organization. The Margaret Wilson Taylor Foundation had become one of Brazil's leading social organizations, serving over 10,000 people a year through programs implemented in every state of the country. "Michael," said the eldest grandson, Edward, 5 years old, "tell us the story of Grandma Margaret again." "Which part of the story do you want to hear, my boy?" "The part about the rain." Michael smiled. The children were always fascinated by the beginning of the story, with the drama of that rainy afternoon that had changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was driving my truck on the road between Pittsburgh and Greenfield. As he told the story once more, Michael looked around and saw attentive faces, not just from the grandchildren, but from Emily, David, Olivia, Gabriel, and many others who had joined the family over the years. And when I saw that elderly woman alone in her wheelchair out in the rain, I knew I had to stop. "How did you know, Grandpa?" "Because your heart always knows when someone needs help. And when you listen to your heart, magical things can happen." "What kind of magical things?" "Families can form, love can grow, and people who were lost can find their way home." The story ended with applause, as it always did. But this time, Emily asked to say something. "Children," she said, "I want you to understand something very important about this story." "What, Grandma?" "This isn't a story that happened once and ended. It's a story that keeps happening every day." "How?" "Every time you help a friend at school, you're continuing the story. Every time you're kind to someone who's sad, you're continuing the story. Every time you do the right thing even when it's hard, you're continuing the story. And when we grow up? When you grow up, you'll tell this story to your children. And you'll teach them to continue the story too. Forever." Because stories of love and kindness never end. They only multiply. That night, after everyone had left and the children were asleep, Michael and Emily sat on the porch of the house where it all began. "We did it," said Michael, looking up at the starry sky. "Did what?" "Kept the promise we made to Mrs. Margaret. We were happy. We took care of the children. We honored her memory and little David's. And we created a legacy that will last long after we're gone." "Do you think she knows?" Michael asked. "Do you think she can see us from where she is?" "I'm sure she can," Emily replied. "And I think she's proud." Proud. And grateful to have found a family who truly loved her. They sat in silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own memories and reflections. "Michael," Emily finally said, "do you regret anything?" "Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And me neither. Every hardship we faced was worth what we built. Every moment of fear was worth the peace we have now. Every tear we shed was worth the joy we've known." As they spoke, a light rain began to fall. Not a heavy downpour like the one that afternoon that had changed their lives, but a gentle, comforting rain. "Look," Michael said, smiling. "Rain. Like that afternoon. But now it's not a frightening rain. It's a rain that blesses. A rain that reminds us where we came from and how far we've come." They stood and went inside, leaving the rain to softly wash over the garden where Mrs. Margaret had spent so many happy afternoons in the last years of her life. In the kitchen, Emily made tea just as Mrs. Margaret used to do on nights when she couldn't sleep. Michael sat at the table, in the spot where she would always sit to talk with them. "You know," Emily said, pouring the tea, "sometimes I feel like she's still here. I feel it too, especially when we're all together, when the children are playing, when we tell the family stories. I think people like her never really leave. They live on through the values they taught and the love they shared, and through the lives they changed, and the families they helped shape." They finished their tea in thoughtful silence, reflecting on all the paths their lives had taken since that Tuesday afternoon 20 years earlier. "Michael," Emily said as they prepared for bed, "thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For stopping on that road. For changing. Everything. Thank you for opening the door when we showed up at your house, for choosing to love a stranger's grandmother and a lonely truck driver. We didn't choose to love. Love just happened. It happened, and it grew, and it multiplied. Into all this we have today." They went upstairs, passing the rooms of the children who were now staying with them temporarily. David had left his kids with his grandparents while he and his wife traveled for work. Olivia had done the same. 5 generations of our family sleeping under one roof, Emily observed. Mrs. Margaret, us, our children, our grandchildren, and Gabriel, who's practically become a brother. She got what she always wanted, a big, close-knit family. And we got what we always needed, a place to come home to, people to love, a purpose bigger than ourselves. In bed, before falling asleep, Michael did what had become a ritual over the years. He looked at the portrait of Mrs. Margaret on the nightstand and murmured, "Good night, Mrs. Margaret. Thank you for watching over our family one more day from where you are." Emily smiled, listening to her husband's words. She had also developed the habit of saying good night to her grandmother in her mind every evening. "Good night, Grandma," she whispered. "Tomorrow we'll keep making you proud." The rain continued to fall softly throughout the night, watering the garden where Mrs. Margaret had planted rose bushes and where the children now played every day. And as the family slept peacefully, protected by the love they had earned and the values they had inherited, the story kept unfolding. In the lives being transformed by the foundation, in the children learning about kindness and courage, in the families discovering that true love overcomes all adversity. The story that had begun on a wet road had become an endless well of hope and inspiration, and it would continue to be so for many generations because stories of true love never truly end. They simply turn into seeds that sprout in new hearts, in new families, in new opportunities to do good and choose love. And so, 20 years after that rainy afternoon, the promise had been fulfilled. Life had conquered despair. Love had conquered abandonment, and family had conquered loneliness. Forever. The end of the story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your sincere words in the comments. Do you think Michael made the right decision by stopping to help Mrs. Margaret? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories.